June 2nd, 1910. When the shadow of the sash appeared on the curtains, it was between 7 and 8 o'clock, and then I was in time again, hearing the watch. It was grandfather's, and when Father gave it to me, he said, "Quentin, I give you the mausoleum of all hope and desire. It's rather excruciatingly apt that you will use it to gain the reductio absurdum of all human experience, which can fit your individual needs no better than it fitted his or his father's. I give it to you not that you may remember time, but that you might forget it now and then, for a moment, and not spend all your breath trying to conquer it. Because no battle is ever won," he said. "They are not even fought. The field only reveals to man his own folly and despair, and victory is an illusion of philosophers and fools." It was propped against a collar box, and I lay listening to it. Hearing it, that is. I don't suppose anybody ever deliberately listens to a watch or a clock. You don't have to. You can be oblivious to the sound for a long while. Then, in a second of ticking, it can create in your mind unbroken the long diminishing parade of time you didn't hear. Like Father said, down the long and lonely light rays, you might see Jesus walking, like, and good St. Francis that said, "Little sister death, that never had a sister." Through the wall I heard Shreve's bed springs and then his slippers on the floor hishing. I got up and went to the dresser and slid my hand along it and touched the watch, turned it face down and went back to bed. But the shadow of the sash was still there, and I had learned to tell almost to the minute, so I'd have to turn my back to it, feeling the eyes animals used to have in the back of their heads when it was on top, itching. It's always the idle habits you acquire which you will regret. Father said that. That Christ was not crucified. He was worn away by a minute clicking of little wheels. It had no sister. And so, as soon as I knew I couldn't see it, I began to wonder what time it was. Father said that constant speculation regarding the position of mechanical hands on an arbitrary dial, which is a symptom of mind function. Excrement, Father said, like sweating. And I sang, all right, wonder. Go on and wonder. If it had been cloudy, I could have looked at the window, thinking what he had said about idle habits, thinking it would be nice for them down at New London if the weather had held up like this. Why shouldn't it? The month of brides, the voice that breathed. She ran right out of the mirror, out of the banked scent. Roses, roses. Mr. and Mrs. Jason Richmond Compson announced the marriage of roses, not virgins like dogwood and milkweed. I said, "I have committed incest, Father," I said. Roses, cunning and serene. If you have attended Harvard 1 year, but don't see the boat race, there should be a refund. Let Jason have it. Give Jason a year at Harvard. Shreve stood in the door, putting his collar on, his glasses glinting rosily, as though he had washed them with his face. "You taking a cut this morning?" "Is it that late?" He looked at his watch. "Bell in 2 minutes." I didn't know it was that late. He was still looking at the watch, his mouth shaping. "I'll have to hustle. I can't stand another cut. Dean told me last week." Put the watch back in his pocket. Then I quit talking. "You'd better slip on your pants and run," he said. He went out. I got up and moved about, listening to him through the wall. He entered the sitting room toward the door. "Aren't you ready yet?" "Not yet. Run along, I'll make it." He went out. The door closed. His feet went down the corridor. Then I could hear the watch again. I quit moving around and went to the window and drew the curtains aside and watched them running for chapel. Same ones fighting the same heaving coat sleeves, the same books and flapping collars flashing past like debris in a flood, and Spode. Calling Shreve my husband. Let him alone, Shreve said. If he's got better sense than to chase after the dirty little sluts, whose business? In the South, you are ashamed of being a virgin. Boys, men, they lie about it, because it means less to women, Father said. He said it was men invented virginity, not women. Father said it's like death, only a state in which the others are left, and I said, but to believe it doesn't matter, and he said, that's what's so sad about anything, not only virginity. And I said, why couldn't it have been me and not her who is unvirgin? And he said, that's why that's so sad too. Nothing is even worth the changing of it. And Shreve said, if he's got better sense than to chase after the dirty little sluts. And I said, did you ever have a sister? Did you? Did you? Spode was in the middle of them like a terrapin in a seat full of scuttering dead leaves, his collar about his ears, moving at his customary unhurried walk. He was from South Carolina, senior. It was his club's boast that he never ran for chapel and had never got there on time, and had never been absent in 4 years, and had never made either chapel or first lecture with a shirt on his back and socks on his feet. About 10 o'clock he'd come in Compson's, get 2 cups of coffee, sit down, and take his socks out of his pocket and remove his shoes and put them on while the coffee cooled. About noon you'd see him with his shirt and collar on, like anybody else. The others passed him running, but he never increased his pace at all. After a while, the quad was empty. A sparrow slanted across the sunlight onto the window ledge and cocked his head at me. His eye was round and bright. First he'd watch me with one eye, then flick, and it would be the other one, his throat pumping faster than any pulse. The hour began to strike. The sparrow quit swapping eyes and watched me steadily with the same one till the chime ceased, as if he were listening too. Then he flicked off the ledge and was gone. It was a while before the last stroke ceased vibrating, stayed in the air, more felt than heard. For a long time, like all the bells that ever rang, still ringing in the long, dying light rays, and Jesus and St. Francis talking about his sister. Because if it were just to hell, if that were all of it, finished, if things just finished themselves, nobody else there but her and me. If we could just have done something so dreadful that they would have fled hell except us. I have committed incest, I said. Father, it was I. It was not Dalton Ames. And when he put Dalton Ames, when he put the pistol in my hand, I didn't. That's why I didn't. He would be there, and she would, and I would. Dalton Ames. If we could have just done something so dreadful, and Father said, that's sad too. People cannot do anything that dreadful. They cannot do anything very dreadful at all. They cannot even remember tomorrow what seemed dreadful today. And I said, you can shirk all things. And he said, can you? And I will look down and see my murmuring bones and the deep water like wind, like a roof of wind. And after a long time they cannot distinguish even bones upon the lonely and invalid sand, until on the day when he says, rise, Only the flatiron would come floating up. It's not when you realize that nothing can help you. Religion, pride, anything. It's when you realize that you don't need any aid. Dalton Ames, Dalton Ames, Dalton Ames. If I could have been his mother, lying with open body lifted, laughing, holding his father with my hand, refraining, seeing, watching him die before he lived. 1 minute she was standing in the door. I went to the dresser and took up the watch, with the face still down. I tapped the crystal on the corner of the dresser and caught the fragments of glass in my hand, and put them into the ashtray and twisted the hands off and put them in the tray. The watch ticked on. I turned the face up, the blank dial with little wheels clicking and clicking behind it, not knowing any better. Jesus walking on Galilee and Washington not telling lies. Father brought back a watch charm from the St. Louis Fair to Jason. Tiny opera glass into which you squinted with one eye and saw a skyscraper, a Ferris wheel all spidery. Niagara Falls on a pinhead. There was a red smear on the dial. When I saw it, my thumb began to smart. I put the watch down and went into Shreve's room and got the iodine and painted the cut. Cleaned the rest of the glass out of the rim with the towel. I laid out 2 suits of underwear with socks, shirts, collars, and ties, and packed my trunk. I put in everything except my new suit and an old one, and 2 pairs of shoes and 2 hats and my books. Carried the books into the sitting room and stacked them on the table. The ones I had brought from home, and the ones... Father said it used to be a gentleman was known by his books. Nowadays he's known by the ones he has not returned. And locked the trunk and addressed it. The quarter hour sounded. I stopped and listened to it until the chimes ceased. I bathed and shaved. The water made my fingers smart a little, so I painted it again. I put on my new suit and put my watch on, and packed the other suit and the accessories and my razor and brushes in my handbag, and wrapped the trunk key into a sheet of paper, and put it in an envelope and addressed it to Father, and wrote the 2 notes and sealed them. The shadow hadn't quite cleared the stoop. I stopped inside the door, watching the shadow move. Moved almost perceptibly, creeping back inside the door, driving the shadow back into the door. Only she was running already when I heard it. In the mirror she was running before I knew what it was. That quick, her train caught up over her arm, she ran out of the mirror like a cloud, her veil swirling in long glints, her heels brittle and fast, clutching her dress onto her shoulder with the other hand, running out of the mirror. The smells, roses, roses, the voice that breathed o'er Eden. Then she was across the porch. I couldn't hear her heels then, in the moonlight like a cloud. The floating shadow of the veil running across the grass into the bellowing. She ran out of her dress, clutching her bridle, running into the bellowing, where TP in the dew. Ooh, hey, sarsaparilla, Benji. Under the box, bellowing. Father had a V-shaped silver cuirass on his running chest. Shreve said, well, you didn't. Is it a wedding or a wake? I couldn't make it, I said. Not with all that primping. What's the matter? You think this is Sunday? I reckon the police won't get me for wearing my new suit one time, I said. I was thinking about the square students. Have you got too proud to attend class, too? I'm going to eat first. The shadow on the stoop was gone. I stepped into the sunlight, finding my shadow again. I walked down the steps just ahead of it. The half-hour went. Then the chimes ceased and died away. Deacon wasn't at the post office either. Stamped the 2 envelopes and mailed the one to Father and put Shreve's in my inside pocket, and then remembered where I had last seen the deacon. It was on Decoration Day, in a GAR uniform, in the middle of the parade. If you waited long enough on any corner, you would see him in whatever parade came along. The one before was on Columbus or Garibaldi's or somebody's birthday. He was in the street sweepers section, in a stovepipe hat, carrying a 2-inch Italian flag, smoking a cigar among the brooms and scoops. But the last time was the GAR one, because Shreve said, "There now, look at what your grandpa did to that poor old nigger." "Yes," I said. "Now he can spend day after day marching in parades. If it hadn't been for my grandfather, he'd have to work like white folks." I didn't see him anywhere, but I never knew even a working nigger that you could find when you wanted him, let alone one that lived off the fat of the land. Car came along. I went over to town and went to Parker's and had a good breakfast. While I was eating, I heard a clock strike the hour. But then I suppose it takes at least 1 hour to lose time in. Who has been longer than history getting into the mechanical progression of it? When I finished breakfast, I bought a cigar. The girl said a 50-cent one was the best, so I took one and lit it and went out to the street. I stood there and took a couple of puffs. Then I held it in my hand and went on toward this corner. Past the jeweler's window, but I looked away in time. The corner 2 bootblacks caught me, one on either side, shrill and raucous, like blackbirds. I gave the cigar to one of them and the other one a nickel. Then they let me alone. The one with the cigar was trying to sell it to the other for the nickel. There was a clock high up in the sun, and I thought about how, when you don't want to do a thing, your body will try to trick you into doing it, sort of unawares. I could feel the muscles in the back of my neck, and then I could hear my watch ticking away in my pocket, and after a while I had all the other sounds shut away, leaving only the watch in my pocket. I turned back up the street to the window. He was working at the table behind the window. He was going bald. There was a glass in his eye, a metal tube screwed into his face. I went in. The place was full of ticking, like crickets in September grass, and I could hear a big clock on the wall above his head. He looked up, his eye big and blurred and rushing beyond the glass. Took mine out and handed it to him. I broke my watch. He flipped it over in his hand. "I should say you have. You must have stepped on it." "Yes, sir, I knocked it off the dresser and stepped on it in the dark. It's still running, though." He pried the back open and squinted into it. "It ain't been all right. I can't tell until I go over it, though. I'll go into it this afternoon." "I'll bring it back later," I said. "Would you mind telling me if any of those watches in the window are right?" He held my watch on his palm and looked up at me with his blurred, rushing eye. "I made a bet with a fellow," I said, "and I forgot my glasses this morning." "All right," he said. He laid the watch down and half rose on his stool and looked over the barrier. Then he glanced up at the wall. "Don't tell me," I said. "Please, sir, just tell me if any of them are right." He looked at me again. He sat back on the stool and pushed the glass up onto his forehead. Left a red circle around his eye, and when it was gone, his whole face looked naked. "What you're celebrating today," he said. "That boat race ain't until next week, is it?" "No, sir. This is just a private celebration. Birthday. Are any of them right?" No, but they haven't been regulated and set yet. If you're thinking of buying one of them. No, sir, I don't need a watch. We have a clock in our sitting room. I'll have this one fixed when I do. I reached my hand. Better leave it now. I'll bring it back later. He gave me the watch. I put it in my pocket. Couldn't hear it now above all the others. I'm much obliged to you. I hope I haven't taken up your time. That's all right. Bring it in when you are ready. And you better put off this celebration until after we win that boat race. Yes, sir, I reckon I had. I went out, shutting the door upon the ticking. I looked back into the window. He was watching me across the barrier. There were about a dozen watches in the window, a dozen different hours, and each with the same assertive and contradictory assurance that mine had, without any hands at all, contradicting one another. I could hear mine ticking away inside my pocket, even though nobody could see it, even though it could tell nothing if anyone could. And so I told myself to take that one, because Father said clocks slay time. He said time is dead as long as it is being clicked off by little wheels. Only when the clock stops does time come to life. The hands were extended slightly off the horizontal at a faint angle, like a gull tilting into the wind, holding all I used to be so sorry about, like the new moon holding water, niggers say. The jeweler was working again, bent over his bench. The tube tunneled into his face. His hair was parted in the center. The part ran up into the bald spot, like a drained marsh in December. I saw the hardware store from across the street. I didn't know you bought flat irons by the pound. Clerk said, these weigh 10 pounds. Only they were bigger than I thought. So I got 2 6-pound little ones, because they would look like a pair of shoes wrapped up. They felt heavy enough together, but I thought again how Father had said about the reductive absurdum of human experience, thinking how the only opportunity I seemed to have for the application of Harvard. Maybe my next year, thinking maybe it takes 2 years in school to learn to do it properly. But they felt heavy enough in the air. Streetcar came, I got in. I didn't see the placard on the front. It was full, mostly prosperous-looking people reading newspapers. The only vacant seat was beside a nigger. He wore derby and shine shoes, and he was holding a dead cigar stub. I used to think that a Southerner had to be always conscious of niggers. I thought that Northerners would expect him to. When I first came east, I kept thinking, you've got to remember to think of them as colored people, not niggers. And if it hadn't happened that I wasn't thrown with many of them, I'd have wasted a lot of time and trouble before I learned that the best way to take all people, black or white, is to take them for what they think they are, then leave them alone. That was when I realized that a nigger is not a person so much as a form of behavior, a sort of averse reflection of the white people he lives among. But I thought at first that I ought to miss having a lot of them around me, because I thought that Northerners thought I did. But I didn't know that I really had missed Roscus and Dilsey and them until that morning in Virginia. The train was stopped when I waked and raised the shade and looked out. Car was blocking a road crossing, where 2 white fences came down a hill and then splayed outward and downward like part of the skeleton of a horn. And there was a nigger on a mule in the middle of the stiff ruts, waiting for the train to move. How long he had been there I didn't know, but he sat straddle of the mule, his head wrapped in a piece of blanket, as if they had been built there with the fence and the road, or with the hill carved out of the hill itself, like a sign put there saying, "You are home again." He didn't have a saddle, and his feet dangled almost to the ground. Mule looked like a rabbit. I raised my window. "Hey, Uncle," I said, "is this the way?" "Sir?" He looked at me, then he loosened the blanket and lifted it away from his ear. "Christmas gift," I said. "Sure coming, boss. You done caught me, ain't you?" "I'll let you off this time." I dragged my pants out of the little hammock and got a quarter out. "But look out next time. I'll be coming back through here 2 days after New Year, and look out then." I threw the quarter out the window. "Buy yourself some Santa Claus." "Yes, sir," he said. He got down and picked up the quarter and rubbed it on his leg. "Thank you, young master, thank you." When the train began to move, I leaned out the window into the cold air, looking back. He stood there beside the gaunt rabbit of a mule, the two of them shabby and motionless and unimpatient. Train swung around the curve, the engine puffing with short, heavy blasts, and they passed smoothly from sight that way, with that quality about them of shabby and timeless patience, of static serenity, that blending of childlike and ready incompetence and paradoxical reliability that tends and protects them. It loves out of all reason and robs them steadily and evades responsibility and obligations by means too barefaced to be called subterfuge even, and is taken in theft or evasion with only that frank and spontaneous admiration for the victor which a gentleman feels for anyone who beats him in a fair contest, and withal a fond and unflagging tolerance for white folks. Vagaries like that of a grandparent for unpredictable and troublesome children, which I had forgotten. And all that day, while the train wound through rushing gaps and long ledges, where movement was only a laboring sound of the exhaust and groaning wheels, and the eternal mountains stood fading into the thick sky, I thought of home, of the bleak station and the mud and the niggers and country folks thronging slowly about the square, with toy monkeys and wagons and candy and sacks and Roman candles sticking out. And my insides would move like they used to do in school when the bell rang. I wouldn't begin counting until the clock struck 3. Then I would begin counting to 60 and folding down one finger and thinking of the other 14 fingers, waiting to be folded down, or 13 or 12 or 8 or 7, until all of a sudden I'd realize silence in the unwinking minds, and I'd say, "Ma'am?"
"Your name is Quentin, isn't it?"
Miss Laura said. Then more silence and the cruel, unwinking minds and hands jerking into the silence.
"Tell Quentin who discovered the Mississippi River, Henry."
"DeSoto." Then the minds would go away, and after a while I'd be afraid I had gotten behind, and I'd count fast and fold down another finger. Then I'd be afraid I was going too fast, and so I'd slow up. Then I'd get afraid and count fast again. So I never could count even with the bell, and the released surging of feet moving already, feeling earth in the scuffed floor, and the day like a pane of glass struck a light, a sharp blow, and my insides would move sitting still. Moving sitting still. 1 minute she was standing in the door, Benji, bellowing. Benjamin, the child of my old age, bellowing, "Caddy, Caddy."
"I'm going to run away."
He began to cry. She went and touched him.
"Hush, I'm not going to. Hush."
He hushed.
"You smell what you tell him when he want to. Don't have to listen nor talk."
Can he smell that new name they give him? Can he smell bad luck?
What do you want to worry about luck for? Luck can't do him no hurt."
What they change his name for, then, if it ain't trying to help his luck? The streetcar stopped, started, stopped again. Below the window I watched the crowns of people's heads passing beneath new straw hats, not yet unbleached. There were women in the car now, with market baskets, and men in work clothes were beginning to outnumber the shine shoes and collars. Nigger touched my knee. "Pardon me," he said. I swung my legs out and let him pass. We were going beside a blank wall, the sound clattering back into the car, at the women with market baskets on their knees, and a man in a stained hat with a pipe stuck in the band. I could smell water, and in a break in the wall I saw a glint of water and two masts, and a gull motionless in midair, like on an invisible wire between the masts. And I raised my hand and, through my coat, touched the letters I had written. When the car stopped, I got off. The bridge was open to let a schooner through. She was in tow, the tug nudging along under her quarter, trailing smoke. But the ship herself was like she was moving without visible means. A man, naked to the waist, was coiling down a line on the forecastle head. His body was burned the color of leaf tobacco. Another man in a straw hat without any crown was at the wheel. Ship went through the bridge, moving under bare poles, like a ghost in broad day, with three gulls hovering above the stern like toys on invisible wires. When it closed, I crossed to the other side and leaned on the rail above the boathouses. The float was empty and the doors were closed. The crew, just pulling the late afternoon now, resting up before. The shadow of the bridge, the tiers of railing, my shadow leaning flat upon the water. So easily had tricked it, that would not quit me. At least 50 feet it was, and if I only had something to blot it into the water, holding it until it was drowned. The shadow of the package like two shoes wrapped up, lying on the water. Niggers say a drowned man's shadow was watching him in the water all the time. It twinkled and glinted like breathing. The float slow like breathing too, and debris half submerged, healing out of the sea and the caverns and the grottos of the sea. The displacement of water is equal to the something of something, reducto absurdum, of all human experience. And 2 6-pound flat irons weigh more than one tailor's goose.
What a sinful waste,
Dilsey would say. Benji knew it when Dimity died. He cried.
He smell it. He smell it.
The tug came back downstream, the water shearing in long, rolling cylinders, rocking the float at last with the echo of passage. The float lurching onto the rolling cylinder with a plopping sound, and a long jarring noise as the door rolled back and 2 men emerged, carrying a shell. They set it in the water, and a moment later Bland came out with the skulls. He wore flannels, a gray jacket, and a stiff straw hat. Either he or his mother had read somewhere that Oxford students pulled in flannels and stiff hats. So early one March, they bought Gerald a 1-pair shell, and in his flannels and stiff hat, he went on the river. The folks at the boathouses threatened to call a policeman, but he went anyway. His mother came down and hired Otto, in a fursuit like an Arctic explorer's, and saw him off in a 25-mile wind and a steady drove of ice floes like dirty sheep. Ever since then I have believed that God is not only a gentleman and a sport. He is a Kentuckian, too. When he sailed away, she made a detour and came down to the river again and drove along parallel with him, the car in low gear. They said you couldn't have told they'd ever seen one another before, like a king and queen, not even looking at one another, just moving side by side across Massachusetts on parallel courses like a couple of planets. He got in and pulled away. He pulled pretty well now, he ought to. They said his mother tried to make him give rowing up and do something else the rest of his class couldn't or wouldn't do. But for once he was stubborn, if you could call it stubbornness, sitting in his attitudes of princely boredom, with his curly yellow hair and his violet eyes and his eyelashes and his New York clothes, while his mama was telling us about Gerald's horses and Gerald's niggers and Gerald's women. Husbands and fathers in Kentucky must have been awful glad when she carried Gerald off to Cambridge. She had an apartment over in town, and Gerald had one there too, besides his room in college. She approved of Gerald associating with me because I at least revealed a blundering sense of noblesse oblige by getting myself born below Mason and Dixon, and a few others whose geography met the requirements, minimum, forgave at least, or condoned. But since she met Spode coming out of Chapel 1, he said she couldn't be a lady. No lady would be out at that hour of the night. She never had been able to forgive him for having 5 names, including that of a present English ducal house. I'm sure she solaced herself by being convinced that some misfit, Maingault or Mortimer, had got mixed up with the lodge-keeper's daughter, which was quite probable, whether she invented it or not. Spode was the world champion sitter around, no holds barred, and gouging discretionary. The shell was a speck now, the oars catching the sun in spaced glints, as if the hull were winking itself along. Did you ever have a sister? No, but they're all bitches. Did you ever a sister? 1 minute she was. Bitches. Not bitch 1 minute. She stood in the door. Dalton Ames, Dalton Ames, Dalton shirts. I thought all the time they were khaki, army-issue khaki, until I saw they were of heavy Chinese silk or finest flannel, because they made his face so brown, his eyes so blue. Dalton Ames. It just missed gentility. Theatrical fixture. Just paper mache. Then touch. Oh, asbestos. Not quite bronze. But won't see him at the house. Caddy's a woman, too, remember. She must do things for women's reasons, too. Why won't you bring him to the house, Caddy? Why must you do like nigger women do in the pasture, the ditches, the dark woods, hot, hidden, furious in the dark woods? And after a while I had been hearing my watch for some time, and I could feel the letters crackle through my coat against the railing. And I leaned on the railing, watching my shadow. How I had tricked it. I moved along the rail, but my suit was dark too, and I could wipe my hands, watching my shadow. How I had tricked it. I walked it into the shadow of the quay. Then I went east.
Harvard, my Harvard boy. Harvard, Harvard.
That pimple-faced infant she met at the field meet with colored ribbons, skulking along the fence, trying to whistle her out like a puppy, because they couldn't cajole him into the dining room. Mother believed he had some sort of spell he was going to cast on her when he got her alone. Yet any blackguard. He was lying beside the box under the window, bellowing. That could drive up in a limousine with a flower in his buttonhole.
Harvard. Quentin, this is Herbert. My Harvard boy. Herbert will be a big brother. Has already promised Jason a position in the bank.
Hardy, celluloid like a drummer, face full of teeth, white but not smiling. I've heard of him up there. All teeth, but not smiling. You going to drive? Get in, Quentin. You going to drive? It's her car. Aren't you proud of your little sister? Owns first auto in town. Herbert, his present. Louis has been giving her lessons every morning. Didn't you get my letter? Mr. and Mrs. Jason Richmond Compson announced the marriage of their daughter Candace to Mr. Sidney Herbert Head on the 25th of April, 1910 at Jefferson, Mississippi. At home after the 1st of August. Number something Avenue, South Bend, Indiana. Shreve said, Aren't you even going to open it? 3 days times Mr. and Mrs. Jason Richmond Compson. Young Lochinvar rode out of the West a little too soon, didn't he? I'm from the South. You're funny, aren't you? Oh, yes, I knew it was somewhere in the country. You're funny, aren't you? You ought to join a circus. I did. That's how I ruined my eyes, watering the elephant's fleas. 3 times. These country girls, you can't even tell about them, can you? Well, anyway, Byron never had his wish, thank God. But not hit a man in glasses. Aren't you even going to open it? It lay on the table, candle burning at each corner upon the envelope, tied in a soiled pink garter. 2 artificial flowers. Not hit a man in glasses.
Country people, poor things. They never saw an auto before. Lots of them. Honk the horn, Candace, so
She wouldn't look at me.
they'll get out of the way.
Wouldn't look at me.
Your father wouldn't like it if you were to injure one of them. I declare, your father will simply have to get an auto now. I'm almost sorry you brought it down, Herbert. I've enjoyed it so much. Of course, there's the carriage, but so often when I'd like to go out, Mr. Compson has the darkies doing something. It would be worth my head to interrupt. He insists that Roscus is at my call all the time, but I know what that means. I know how often people make promises just to satisfy their consciences. Are you going to treat my little baby girl that way, Herbert? But I know you won't. Herbert has spoiled us all to death, Quentin. Did I write you that he is going to take Jason into his bank when Jason finishes high school? Jason will make a splendid banker. He is the only one of my children with any practical sense. You can thank me for that. He takes after my people. The others are all Compson.
Jason furnished the flour. They made kites on the back porch and sold them for a nickel apiece. He and the Patterson boy. Jason was treasurer.
We have sold Benji's pasture so that Quentin may go to Harvard.
There was no nigger in this streetcar, and the hats unbleached as yet, flowing past under the window. Going to Harvard.
We have sold Benji's.
He lay on the ground under the window, bellowing. Your little brother, a brother to you. You should have a car. It's done you no end of good. Don't you think so, Quentin? I'll call him Quentin once, you see. I've heard so much about him from Candace.
Why shouldn't you? I want my boys to be more than friends. Yes, Candace and Quentin, more than friends.
Father, I have committed. What a pity you had no brother or sister. No sister, had no sister.
Don't ask Quentin. He and Mr. Compson both feel a little insulted when I'm strong enough to come down to the table. I'm going on nerve now. I'll pay for it after it's all over. And you have taken my little daughter away from me.
My little sister had no. If I could say mother, Mother. Unless I do what I am tempted to, and take you instead of, I don't think Mr. Compson could overtake the car.
Ah, Herbert. Candace, do you hear that?
She wouldn't look at me. Soft, stubborn jaw angle, not back-looking.
You needn't be jealous, though. It's just an old woman he's flattering. A grown married daughter. I can't believe it.
Nonsense. You look like a girl. You are lots younger than Candace. Color in your cheeks like a girl. A face reproachful, tearful. An odor of camphor and of tears. A voice weeping steadily and softly beyond the toilet door. The twilight-colored smell of honeysuckle, bringing empty trunks down the attic stairs. They sounded like coffins. French lick. Found not death at the Salt Lick. Hats, not unbleached and not hats. In 3 years I cannot wear a hat. I could not. Was. Will there be hats then, since I was not, and not Harvard then, where the best of thought, Father said, clings like dead ivy vines upon old dead brick. Not Harvard then. Not to me, anyway. Again. Sadder than was. Again. Saddest of all. Again. Spode had a shirt on. Then it must be. When I can see my shadow again, if not careful, that I tricked into the water, shall tread again upon my impervious shadow. But no sister. I wouldn't have done it.
I won't have my daughter spied on.
I wouldn't have.
How can I control any of them when you have always taught them to have no respect for me and my wishes? I know you look down on my people, but is that any reason for teaching my children, my own children I suffered for, to have no respect?
Trampling my shadow's bones into the concrete with hard heels. And then I was hearing the watch, and I touched the letters through my coat.
I will not have my daughter spied on by you or Quentin or anybody, no matter what you think she has done.
At least you agree there is reason for having her watched. I wouldn't have. I know you wouldn't. I didn't mean to speak so sharply, but women have no respect for each other, for themselves. But why did she? The chimes began as I stepped on my shadow, but it was the quarter hour. The deacon wasn't in sight anywhere. Think I would have, could have. She didn't mean that's the way women do things. It's because she loves Caddy. Street lamps would go down the hill, then rise toward town. I walked upon the belly of my shadow. I could extend my hand beyond it. Feeling Father behind me, the rasping darkness of summer and August, the street lamps. Father and I protect women from one another, from themselves, our women. Women are like that. They don't acquire knowledge of people. We are for that. They are just born with a practical fertility of suspicion. They make a crop every so often, and usually right. They have an affinity for evil, for supplying whatever the evil lacks in itself, for drawing it about them instinctively, as you do bedclothing in slumber, fertilizing the mind for it until the evil has served its purpose, whether it ever existed or no. He was coming along between a couple of freshmen. He hadn't quite recovered from the parade, for he gave me a salute, a very superior offerish kind. "I want to see you a minute," I said, stopping. "See me? All right. See you again, fellas," he said, stopping and turning back. Glad to have chatted with you." That was a deacon all over. Talk about your natural psychologists. They said he hadn't missed a train at the beginning of school in 40 years, and that he could pick out a Southerner with one glance. He never missed, and once he had heard you speak, he could name your state. He had a regular uniform he met trains in, sort of Uncle Tom's cabin outfit, patches and all. "Yes, sir. Right this way, young massa. Here we is, taking your bags. Here, boy, come here and get these grips." Whereupon a moving mountain of luggage would edge up, revealing a white boy of about 15, and the deacon would hang another bag on him, somehow, and drive him off. "Now then, don't you drop it." "Yes, sir, young master. Just give the old nigger your room number, and it'll be done. You got card there when you arrives." From then on, until he had you completely subjugated, he was always in or out of your room, ubiquitous and garrulous, though his manner gradually moved northward as his raiment improved, until last, when he had bled you until you began to learn better, he was calling you Quentin or whatever, and when you saw him next, he'd be wearing a cast-off Brooks suit and a hat with a Princeton club. I forget which band that someone had given him, and which he was pleasantly and unshakably convinced was part of Abe Lincoln's military sash. Someone spread this story years ago when he first appeared around the college, from wherever he came from, that he was a graduate of the divinity school, and when he came to understand what it meant, he was so taken with it that he began to retell the story himself, until at last he must come to believe he really had. Anyway, he related long, pointless anecdotes of his undergraduate days, speaking familiarly of dead and departed professors by their first names, usually incorrect ones. But he had been guide, mentor, and friend to unnumbered crops of innocent and lonely freshmen, and I suppose that with all his petty chicanery and hypocrisy, he stank no higher in heaven's nostrils than any other. "Haven't seen you in 3 or 4 days," he said, staring at me from his still military aura. "You been sick?" "No, I've been all right, working, I reckon. I've seen you, though." "Yeah?" "In the parade the other day." "Oh, that, yes. I was there. I didn't care nothing about that sort of thing, you understand. But the boys like to have me with them. The veterans does. Ladies wants all the old veterans to turn out, you know. So I has to oblige them." "And on that WAP holiday, too," I said. "You were obliging the WCTU then, I reckon." "That? I was doing that for my son-in-law. He aims to get a job on the city forces, street cleaner. I tells him all he wants is a broom to sleep on." "You saw me, did you?" "Both times." "Yes. I mean in uniform. How'd I look?" "You look fine. You look better than any of them. They ought to make you a general, Deacon." He touched my arm lightly, his hand that warm, gentle quality of niggers' hands. "Listen, this ain't for outside talking. I don't mind telling you because you and me's the same folks. Come long and short." He leaned a little to me, speaking rapidly, his eyes not looking at me. "I got strings out right now. Wait till next year. Just wait. Then see where I'm marching. I won't need to tell you how I'm fixing it. I say, just wait and see, my boy." He looked at me now and clapped me lightly on the shoulder and rocked back on his heels, nodding at me. "Yes, sir, I didn't turn Democrat 3 years ago for nothing. My son-in-law in the city, me, yes, sir. If just turning Democrat'll make that son of a bitch go to work, and me, just you stand on that corner yonder a year from 2 days ago and see." "I hope so. You deserve it, Deacon. And while I think about it," I took the letter from my pocket. "Take this around to my room tomorrow and give it to Shreve. He'll have something for you. But not till tomorrow, mind." He took the letter and examined it. "Is sealed up?" "Yes, and it's written inside. Not good until tomorrow." He said. He looked at the envelope, his mouth pursed. "Something for me, you say?" "Yes, a present I'm making you." He was looking at me now, the envelope white in his black hand, in the sun. His eyes were soft and irisless and brown, and suddenly I saw Roscus watching me from behind all his white folks' claptrap of uniforms and politics and Harvard manner, diffident, secret, inarticulate and sad. "You ain't playing no joke on the old nigger, is you?" "You know I'm not. Did any Southerner ever play a joke on you?" "You're right. They're fine folk. But you can't live with them." "Did you ever try?" I said. But Roscus was gone. Once more he was that self he had long since taught himself to wear in the world's eye, pompous, spurious, not quite gross. "I'll confer your wishes, my boy." "Not until tomorrow, remember?" "Sure," he said. "Understood, my boy." "Well, I hope," I said. He looked down at me, benignant, profound. Suddenly I held out my hand, and we shook. He gravely took from the pompous height of his municipal and military dream. "You're a good fellow, Deacon. I hope you've helped a lot of young fellows here and there." "I've tried to treat all folks right," he said. "I draw no petty social lines. A man to me is a man, wherever I find him." "I hope you'll always find as many friends as you've made." "Young fellows, I get along with them. They don't forget me neither," he said, waving the envelope. He put it into his pocket and buttoned his coat. "Yes, sir," he said. "I've had good friends." The chimes began again, the half-hour. I stood in the belly of my shadow and listened to the strokes, spaced and tranquil among the sunlight, among the thin, still little leaves, spaced and peaceful and serene, with that quality of autumn always in bells, even in the month of brides. Lying on the ground under the window, bellowing. He took one look at her and knew, out of the mouths of babes. The street lamps. The chimes ceased. I went back to the post office, treading my shadow into the pavement. Go down the hill, then they rise toward town like lanterns, hung one above another on a wall. Father said because she loves Caddy, she loves people through their shortcomings. Uncle Maury, straddling his legs before the fire, must remove one hand long enough to drink Christmas. Jason ran on, his hands in his pockets, fell down and lay there like a trussed fowl until Verse set him up. "Why don't you keep them hands out in your pockets when you're running? You could stand up then." Rolling his head in the cradle, rolling it flat across the back. Caddy told Jason, Verse said, that the reason Uncle Maury didn't work was that he used to roll his head in the cradle when he was little. Shreve was coming up the walk, shambling, fatly earnest, his glasses glinting beneath the running leaves like little pools. "I gave Deacon a note for some things. I may not be in this afternoon, so don't you let him have anything until tomorrow, will you?" "All right." He looked at me. "Say, what are you doing today anyhow? All dressed up and mooning around like the prologue to a suttee. Did you go to psychology this morning?" "I'm not doing anything. Not until tomorrow now." "What's that you got there?" "Nothing. Pair of shoes I had half sold. Not until tomorrow, you hear?" "Sure, all right. Oh, by the way, did you get a letter off the table this morning?" "No." "It's there, from Semiramis. Chauffeur brought it before 10 o'clock. "All right, I'll get it. Wonder what she wants now." "Another band recital, I guess. Tuppity-ta-ta, Gerald-ba." "A little louder on the drum, Quentin." "God, I'm glad I'm not a gentleman." He went on, nursing a book, a little shapeless. fatly intent. The street lamps. Do you think so because one of our forefathers was a governor, and 3 were generals, and mothers weren't? Any live man is better than any dead man, but no live or dead man is very much better than any other live or dead man. Done in mother's mind, though. Finished. Then we were all poisoned. You are confusing sin and morality. Women don't do that. Your mother is thinking of morality. Whether it be sin or not has not occurred to her.
Jason, I must go away. You keep the others, I'll take Jason, and go where nobody knows us, so he'll have a chance to grow up and forget all this. The others don't love me. They have never loved anything. With that streak of Compson selfishness and false pride, Jason was the only one my heart went out to without dread.
Nonsense. Jason is all right. I was thinking that as soon as you feel better, you and Caddy might go up to French Lick.
And leave Jason here with nobody but you and the darkies?
She will forget him. Then all the talk will die away. Found not death at the Salt Licks.
Maybe I could find a husband for her.
Not death at the Salt Licks. The car came up and stopped. The bells were still ringing the half hour. I got on, and it went on again, blotting the half hour. No, the 3/4. Then it would be 10 minutes anyway. To leave Harvard. Your mother's dreamed for, sold Benji's pasture for.
What have I done to have been given children like these? Benjamin was punishment enough, and now for her to have no more regard for me, her own mother? I've suffered for her, dreamed, planned, and sacrificed. I went down into the valley, yet never since she opened her eyes has she given me one unselfish thought. At times I look at her and wonder if she can be my child. Except Jason. He has never given me one moment's sorrow. Since I first held him in my arms, I knew then that he was to be my joy and my salvation. I thought that Benjamin was punishment enough for any sins I have committed. I thought he was my punishment for putting aside my pride and marrying a man who held himself above me. I don't complain. I loved him above all of them because of it, because of my duty, though Jason pulling at my heart all the while. But I see now that I have not suffered enough. I see now that I must pay for your sins as well as mine. What have you done? What sins have your high and mighty people visited upon me? But you'll take up for them. You always have found excuses for your own blood. Only Jason can do wrong, because he is more Bascom than Compson. While your own daughter, my little daughter, my baby girl, is no better than that. When I was a girl, I was unfortunate. I was only a Bascom. I was taught that there is no halfway ground, that a woman is either a lady or not. But I never dreamed, when I held her in my arms, that any daughter of mine could let herself. Don't you know I can look into her eyes and tell? You may think she'd tell you, but she doesn't. She is secretive. You don't know her. I know things she's done that I'd die before I'd have you know. That's it. Go on, criticize Jason. Accuse me of setting him to watch her as if it were a crime. While your own daughter, can I know? You don't love him, that you wish to believe faults against him. You never have. Yes, ridicule him as you always have, Maury, You cannot hurt me any more than your children already have. And then I'll be gone, and Jason with no one to love him, to shield him from this. I look at him every day, dreading to see this Compson blood beginning to show in him at last, with his sister slipping out to sea. What do you call it then? Have you ever laid eyes on him? Will you even let me try to find out who he is? It's not for myself. I couldn't bear to see him. It's for your sake, to protect you. But who can fight against bad blood? You won't let me try. We ought to sit back with our hands folded while she not only drags your name in the dirt, but corrupts the very air your children breathe. Jason, you must let me go away. I cannot stand it. Let me have Jason, and you keep the others. They're not my flesh and blood like he is. Strangers, nothing of mine, and I am afraid of them. I can take Jason and go where we are not known. I'll go down on my knees and pray for the absolution of my sins, that he may escape this curse. Try to forget that the others ever were.
If that was the 3/4, not over 10 minutes now. One car had just left, and people were already waiting for the next one. I asked, but he didn't know whether another one would leave before noon or not, because you'd think that interurbans. So the first one was another trolley. I got on. You can feel noon. I wonder if even miners in the bowels of the earth. That's why whistles, because people that sweat, and if just far enough from sweat, you won't hear whistles, and in 8 minutes, you should be that far from sweat in Boston. Father said a man is the sum of his misfortunes. One day you'd think misfortune would get tired, but then time is your misfortune, Father said. A gull on an invisible wire attached to space dragged. You carry the symbol of your frustration into eternity. Then the wings are bigger, Father said. Only who can play a harp? I could hear my watch whenever the car stopped, but not often. They were already eating. Who would play the business of eating inside of you, space to space, and time confused, stomach saying, noon, brain, saying 8 o'clock. All right, I wonder what time it is. What of it? People were getting out. The trolley didn't stop so often now, emptied by eating. Then it was past. I got off and stood in my shadow, and after a while a car came along and I got on, and it went back to the interurban station. There was a car ready to leave, and I found a seat next to the window. And it started, and I watched a sort of frazzle out into the slack tide flats, and then trees. Now and then I saw the river, and I thought how nice it would be for them down at New London, if the weather and Gerald's shell going solemnly up the glinting forenoon, and I wondered what the old woman would be wanting now, sending me a note before 10 o'clock in the morning. What picture of Gerald? I to be one of the Dalton Ames, oh asbestos. Quentin has shot. Background. Something with girls in it. Women do have. Always his voice above the gabble, voice that breathed. An affinity for evil, for believing that no woman is to be trusted, but that some men are too innocent to protect themselves. Plain girls. Remote cousins and family, friends whom mere acquaintanceship invested with a sort of blood obligation, noblesse oblige. And she's sitting there telling us before their faces what a shame it was that Gerald should have all the family looks, because a man didn't need it, was better off without it. But without it, a girl was simply lost, telling us about Gerald's women in a... Quentin has shot Herbert. He shot his voice through the floor at Caddy's room. Tone of smug approbation.
When he was 17, I said to him one day, "What a shame that you should have a mouth like that. It should be on a girl's face. And can you imagine?
The curtains leaning in on the twilight upon the odor of the apple tree, her head against the twilight, her arms behind her head, kimono-winged, the voice that breathed o'er Eden, clothed upon the bed, by the nose, seen above the apple.
What he said? Just 17, mind you. Mother, he said, it often is.
And him sitting there in attitudes, regal, watching, 2 or 3 of them through his eyelashes. They gushed like swallows swooping his eyelashes. Shreve said he always had.
Are you going to look after Benji and Father?
The less you say about Benji and Father, the better. When have you ever considered them, Caddy?
Promise.
You needn't worry about them. You're getting out in good shape.
Promise. I'm sick. You'll have to promise.
Wondered who invented that joke. But then he always had considered Mrs. Bland a remarkably preserved woman. He said she was grooming Gerald to seduce a duchess sometime. She called Shreve that fat Canadian youth. Twice she arranged a new roommate for me without consulting me at all. Once for me to move out, once for... He opened the door in the twilight. His face looked like a pumpkin pie. Well, I'll say a fond farewell. Cruel fate may part us, but I will never love another. Never. What are you talking about? I'm talking about cruel fate and 8 yards of apricot silk, and more metal pound for pound than a galley slave, and the sole owner and proprietor of the unchallenged, peripatetic John of the late Confederacy. Then he told me how she had gone to the proctor to have him moved out, and how the proctor had revealed enough low stubbornness to insist on consulting Shreve first. Then she suggested that he send for Shreve right off and do it, and he wouldn't do it. So after that, she was hardly civil to Shreve. I make it a point never to speak harshly of females, Shreve said, but that woman has got more wails like a bitch than any lady in these sovereign states and dominions. And now let her on the table by hand command, or consented, colored. If she knew I had passed almost beneath the window, knowing it there, without, my dear madam, I have not yet had an opportunity of receiving your communication, but I beg in advance to be excused today, or yesterday, and tomorrow, or when, as I remember, that the next one is to be how Gerald throws his nigger downstairs, and how the nigger pleads to be allowed to matriculate in the divinity school, to be near Master Marse Gerald, and how he ran all the way to the station beside the carriage, with tears in his eyes, when Marse Gerald rid away. I will wait until the day for the one about the sawmill husband came to the kitchen door with a shotgun. Gerald went down and bit the gun in 2, and handed it back, and wiped his hands on a silk handkerchief, threw the handkerchief in the stove. I've only heard that one twice. Shot him through the... I saw you come in here, so I watched my chance, and came along. Thought we might get acquainted, have a cigar. Thanks, I don't smoke. No, things must have changed up here since my day. Mind if I light up? Help yourself. Thanks. I've heard a lot, and I guess your mother won't mind if I put the match behind the screen, will she? A lot about you. Candace talked about you all the time up there at the Licks. I got pretty jealous. I says to myself, who is this Quentin anyway? I must see what this animal looks like, because I was hit pretty hard. See, soon as I saw the little girl, I don't mind telling you, it never occurred to me. It was her brother she kept talking about. She couldn't have talked about you any more if you'd been the only man in the world husband. Wouldn't have been in it. You won't change your mind and have a smoke? I don't smoke. In that case, I won't insist, even though it is a pretty fair weed, Cost me $25 $100 wholesale. Friend in Havana. Yes, I guess there are lots of changes up there. Keep promising myself a visit, but I never get around to it. I've been hitting the ball now for 10 years. Can't get away from the bank during school. Fellows' habits change. Things that seem important to an undergraduate, you know. Tell me about things up there. I'm not going to tell Father and Mother, if that's what you're getting at. I'm not going to tell what you are talking about. Understand that I don't care whether you tell or not. It's unfortunate, but there was no police crime. I wasn't the first or the last. I was just unlucky. You might have been luckier. You lie. Keep your shirt on. I'm not trying to make you tell anything you don't want to. I meant no offense. Of course, a young fellow like you would consider a thing of that sort a lot more serious than you will in 5 years. I don't know but one way to consider cheating. I don't think I'm likely to learn different at Harvard. You're better than a play. You must have made the Dramit. Well, you're right. There's no need to tell them. We'll let bygones be bygones, eh? There's no reason why you and I should let a little thing like that come between us. I like you, Quentin. I like your appearance. You don't look like these other hicks. I'm glad we're going to hit it off like this. I've promised your mother to do something for Jason, but I would like to help you too. Jason would be just as well off here, but there's no future in a hole like this for a young fellow like you. Thanks, but you'd better stick to Jason. He'd suit you better than I would. I'm sorry about that business, but as a kid, I never had a mother like yours to teach me the finer points. It would just hurt her unnecessarily to know it. Yes, you're right. There is no need to involve Candace, of course. I said mother and father. Look here, take a look at me. How long do you think you'd last with me? I won't have to last long if you learn to fight up at school, too. Try, and see how long I would. You damn little... What do you think you're getting at? Try and see. My God, the cigar! What would your mother say if she found a blister on her mantle? Just in time, too. Look here, Quentin. We're about to do something we'll both regret. I like you. I liked you as soon as I saw you. I thought he must be a damn good fellow, whoever he is, or Candace wouldn't be so keen on him. Listen, I've been out in the world now for 10 years. Things don't matter so much then. You'll find that out. Let's get together on this thing. Sons of old Harvard and all. I guess I wouldn't know the place now. It's the best place for a young fellow in the world. I'm going to send my sons there to give them a better chance than I had. Wait, don't go yet. Let's discuss this thing. A young man gets these ideas, and I'm all for them. It does him good while he's in school, forms his character. Good for tradition at school. But when he gets out into the world, he'll have to get his the best way he can, because he'll find that everybody else is doing the same thing. Damn to it. Here, let's shake hands and let bygones be bygones, for your mother's sake. Remember her health. Come on, give me your hand. Look at it. It's just out of the convent. No blemish. Not even creased yet. See here? To hell with your money. No, come on. I belong to the family now. I know how it is with a young fellow. He has lots of private affairs. It's always pretty hard to get the old man to stump up for it. I know. I haven't been there so long ago either. But now I'm getting married and all, especially up there. Come on, don't be a fool. Listen, when we get a chance for a real talk, I want to tell you about a little widow over in town. I've heard that too. Keep your damn money. Call it a loan, then. Just shut your eyes a minute, and you'll be 50. Keep your hands off me. You'd better get that cigar off the mantel. Tell and be damned. Then see what it gets you. If you were not a damn fool, you'd have seen that I've got them too tight for any half-baked Galahad of a brother. Your mother's told me about your sort, with your head swelled up. Come in. Oh, come in, dear. Quentin, we were just getting acquainted, talking about Harvard. Did you want me? Can't stay away from the old man, can she?
Go out a minute, Herbert. I want to talk to Quentin.
Come in. Let's all have a gab fest and get acquainted. I was just telling Quentin.
Go on, Herbert. Go out a while.
Well, all right then. I suppose you and Bubber do want to see one another once more, eh? You'd better take that cigar off the mantel. Right as usual, my boy. Then I'll toddle along. Let them order you around while they can, Quentin. Day after tomorrow, it'll be pretty pleased to the old man, won't it, dear? Give us a kiss, honey.
Oh, stop that. Save that for day after tomorrow.
I'll want interest then. Don't let Quentin do anything he can't finish. Oh, by the way, did I tell Quentin the story about the man's parrot and what happened to it? Sad story reminded me of that. Think of it yourself. Ta-ta, see you in the funny paper.
Well?
Well?
What are you up to now?
Nothing.
You're meddling in my business again. Didn't you get enough of that last summer?
Caddy, you've got fever. You're sick. How are you sick?
I'm just sick. I can't ask.
Shoddy's voice through the... Not that blackguard, Caddy. Now and then the river glinted beyond things in sort of swooping glints, across noon and after. Well, after now. Though we had passed where he was still pulling upstream, majestical in the face of gods, better gods. God would be Kenai, too, in Boston, in Massachusetts, or maybe just not a husband. The widowers winking him along in bright winks, and female palms. Adulate, if not a husband, he'd ignore God. That blackguard, Caddy. The river glinted away beyond a swooping curve.
I'm sick. You'll have to promise.
Sick? How are you sick?
I'm just sick. I can't ask anybody yet. Promise me you will.
If they need any looking after, it's because of you. How are you sick? Under the window, we could hear the car leaving for the station. The 8:10 train. To bring back cousins, heads. Increasing himself head by head. But not barbers. Manicure girls. We had a blood horse once. In the stable, yes, but under leather a cur. Quentin has shot all of their voices through the floor of Caddy's room. The car stopped. I got off, into the middle of my shadow. A road crossed the track. There was a wooden marquee with an old man eating something out of a paper bag. And then the car was out of hearing, too. The road went into the trees, where it would be shady. But June foliage in New England, not much thicker than April at home in Mississippi. I could see a smokestack. I turned my back to it, tramping my shadow into the dust.
There was something terrible in me. Sometimes at night I could see it grinning at me. I could see it through them grinning at me, through their faces. It's gone now, and I'm sick.
Caddy.
Don't touch me. Just promise.
If you're sick, you can't.
Yes, I can. After that, it'll be all right. It won't matter. Don't let them send him to Jackson. Promise.
I promise, Caddy.
Don't touch me. Don't touch me.
What does it look like, Caddy?
What?
That thing that grins at you, that thing through them. I could still see the smokestack. That's where the water would be, heading out to sea, and the peaceful grottos. tumbling peacefully they would. And when he said rise, only the flatirons. When Varsh and I hunted all day, we wouldn't take any lunch, and at 12 o'clock I'd get hungry. I'd stay hungry until about 1. Then all of a sudden, I'd even forget that I wasn't hungry anymore. The street lamps go down the hill, then heard the car go down the hill. The chair arm, flat, cool, smooth, under my forehead, shaping the chair. The apple tree leaning on my hair above the Eden clothes, by the nose scene. You've got fever. I felt it yesterday. It's like being near a stove.
Don't touch me.
Caddy, you can't do it if you are sick. That blackguard.
I've got to marry somebody.
Then they told me the bone would have to be broken again. At last I couldn't see the smokestack. The road went beside a wall. Trees leaned over the wall, splayed with sunlight. The stone was cool. Walking near it, you could feel the coolness. Only our country was not like this country. There was something about just walking through it. A kind of still and violent fecundity that satisfied every bred hunger like. Flowing around you, not brooding and nursing every niggard stone. Like it were put to make shift for enough green to go around, among the trees, and even the blue of distance, not that rich chimera. Told me the bone would have to be broken again, and inside me it began to say, and I began to sweat. What do I care? I know what a broken leg is. All it is it won't be anything. I'll just have to stay in the house a little longer, that's all. And my jaw muscles getting numb, and my mouth saying, wait, just a minute. Through the sweat, behind my teeth. And Father, damn that horse. Wait, it's my fault. He came along the fence every morning with a basket toward the kitchen, dragging a stick along the fence every morning. I dragged myself to the window, gas and all, and laid for him with a piece of coal. Dilsey said,
You going to ruin yourself. Ain't you got no more sense than that? Not 4 days since you broke it.
Wait, I'll get used to it in a minute. Just wait a minute. I'll get... Even sound seemed to fail in this air, like the air was worn out with carrying sound so long. Dog's voice carries farther than a train, in the darkness anyway, and some people's. Niggers. Lewis Hatcher never even used his horn, carrying it in that old lantern. I said, Lewis, when was the last time you cleaned that lantern? I cleaned it a little while back. You remember when all that floodwater washed them folks away up yonder? I cleaned it that very day. Old woman and me was sitting for the fire that night, and she say,
Lewis, what you gwine do if that flood get out this fur?
And I say, that's a fact. I reckon I had better clean that lantern up. So I cleaned it that night. That flood was way up in Pennsylvania, I said. Couldn't have even got down this far. That what you says, Lewis said. Water can get this high and wet in Jefferson as it can in Pennsylvania. I reckon it's the folks that says the high water can't get this fur that come floating out on the ridgepole, too. Did you and Martha get out that night? We done just that. I cleaned that lantern, and me and her sot the balance of the night on top of that knoll back in the graveyard. And if I'd have knowed of anyone higher, we'd have been on here instead. And you haven't cleaned that lantern since then? Well, I won't clean it when there ain't no need. You mean until another flood comes along? It kept us on that. Oh, come on, Uncle Lewis, I said. Yes, sir. You do your way and I do mine. If all I got to do to keep out in the hot water is to clean this here lantern, I won't quarrel with no man. Uncle Lewis wouldn't get nothing with a light he could see by, Birch said. I was hunting possums in this country when they was still drowning nits in your pappy's head with coal oil, boy, Lewis said. Catching 'em, too. That's the truth, Birch said. I reckon Uncle Lewis done caught more possum than any man in this county. Yes, sir, Lewis said. I got plenty light for the possums to see, all right. I ain't heard no one of them complain. Hush now, dearie. Ooh-wee, dog. And we'd sit in the dry leaves that whispered a little with the slow respiration of our waiting, and with the slow breathing of the earth in the windless October, the rank smell of the lantern fouling the brittle air, listening to the dogs and to the echo of Lewis's voice dying away. He never raised it, yet on a still night we have heard it from our front porch. When he called the dogs in, he sounded just like the horn he carried, slung on his shoulder, and never used, but clearer, mellower, as though his voice were a part of darkness and silence, coiling out of it, coiling into it again. Ooh, ooh, ooh.
Got to marry somebody.
Have there been very many, Caddy?
I don't know. Too many. Will you look after Benji and Father?
You don't know whose it is, then. Does he know?
Don't touch me. Will you look after Benji and Father?
I began to feel the water before I came to the bridge. The bridge was of gray stone, lichened, dappled with slow moisture, where the fungus crept. Beneath it the water was clear and still in the shadow, whispering and clucking about the stone in fading swirls of spinning sky. Caddy, that...
I've got to marry somebody.
Birch told me about a man mutilated himself. He went into the woods and did it with a razor, sitting in a ditch, a broken razor, flinging them backward over his shoulder, the same motion complete. He jerked skein of blood backward, not looping. But that's not it. It's not having them. It's never to have had them. Then I could say, oh, that's Chinese. I don't know Chinese. And Father said, it's because you are a virgin, don't you see? Women are never virgins. Purity is a negative state, and therefore contrary to nature. Nature is hurting you, not Caddy. And I said, that's just words. And he said, so is virginity. And I said, you don't know. You can't know. And he said, yes. On that instant, when we came to realize that tragedy is second-hand. Where the shadow of the bridge fell, I could see down for a long way, but not as far as the bottom. When you leave a leaf in water a long time, after a while, the tissue will be gone and the delicate fibers waving slow as the motion of sleep. They won't touch one another, no matter how knotted up they once were, no matter how close they lay once to the bones. And maybe when he says, rise, the eyes will come floating up too, out of the deep quiet and the sleep, to look on glory. And after a while the flat irons would come floating up. I hid them under the end of the bridge and went back and leaned on the rail. I could not see the bottom, but I could see a long way into the motion of the water before the eye gave out. And then I saw a shadow hanging like a fat arrow, stemming into the current. Mayflies skimmed in and out of the shadow of the bridge, just above the surface. If it could just be a hell beyond that, the clean flame, the two of us, more than dead, then you will have only me, then only me, then the two of us amid the pointing and the horror, beyond the clean flame. The arrow increased without motion. Then in a quick swirl the trout leapt a fly beneath the surface with that sort of gigantic delicacy of an elephant picking up a peanut. The fading vortex drifted away downstream, and then I saw the arrow again, nose into the current, waving delicately to the motion of the water above which the mayflies slanted and poised. Only you and me. Then amid the pointing and the horror, walled by the clean flame, the trout hung delicate and motionless amid the wavering shadows. 3 boys with fishing poles came onto the bridge, and we leaned on the rail and looked down at the trout. They knew the fish. He was a neighborhood character. They've been trying to catch that trout for 25 years. There's a store in Boston offers a $25 fishing rod to anybody that can catch him. Why don't you all catch him then? Wouldn't you like to have a $25 fishing rod? Yes, they said. They leaned on a rail, looking down at the trout. I sure would, one said. I wouldn't take the rod, the second said. I'd take the money instead. Maybe they wouldn't do that, the first said. I bet he'd make you take the rod. Then I'd sell it. You couldn't get $25 for it. I'd take what I could get then. I can catch just as many fish with this pole as I could with a $25 one. Then they talked about what they would do with $25. They all talked at once, their voices insistent and contradictory and impatient, making of an reality a possibility, then a probability, then an incontrovertible fact, as people will when their desires become words. I'd buy a horse and wagon, the second said. Yes, you would, the other said. I would. I know where I can buy one for $25. I know a man. Who is it? That's all right, who it is. I can buy it for $25. Yeah, the other said. He don't know any such thing. He's just talking. Do you think so? The boy said. They continued to jeer at him, but he said nothing more. He leaned on the rail, looking down at the trout, which he had already spent, and suddenly the acrimony, the conflict was gone from their voices, as if to them, too, it was as though he had captured the fish and bought his horse and wagon, they, too, partaking of that adult trait of being convinced of anything by assumption of silent superiority. I suppose that people, using themselves and each other so much by words, are at least consistent in attributing wisdom to a still tongue. And for a while I could feel the other two seeking swiftly for some means by which to cope with him, to rob him of his horse and wagon. You couldn't get $25 for that pole, the first said. I bet anything you couldn't. You haven't caught that trout yet, the third said suddenly. Then they both cried, Yeah, what did you tell you? What's some man's name? I dare you to tell. There ain't any such man. Oh, shut up, the second said. Look, here he comes again. They leaned on the rail motionless, identical, their poles slanting slenderly in the sunlight, also identical. The trout rose without haste, a shadow and faint wavering increase. Again, the little vortex faded slowly downstream. Gee, the first one murmured. We don't try to catch him any more, he said. We just watch Boston folks that come out and try. Is he the only fish in this pool? Yes. He ran all the others out. Best place to fish around here is down at the eddy. No, tank, the second said. It's better at Bigelow's mill, 2-1. Then they argued for a while about which was the best fishing, and then left off all of a sudden to watch the trout rise again, and the broken swirl of water suck down a little of the sky. I asked how far it was to the nearest town. They told me. But the closest car line is that way, the second said, pointing back down the road. Where are you going? Nowhere, just walking. You from the college? Yes. Are there any factories in that town? Factories? They looked at me. "No," the second said, "not there." They looked at my clothes. "You looking for work?" "How about Bigelow's Mill?" the third said. "That's a factory." "Factory, my eye! He means a sure enough factory." "One with a whistle," I said. "I haven't heard any 1 o'clock whistle yet." "Oh," the second said, "there's a clock in the Unitarian steeple. You can find out the time from that. Haven't you got a watch on that chain?" "I broke it this morning." I showed them my watch. They examined it gravely. "It's still running," the second said. "What does a watch like that cost?" "It was a present," I said. "My father gave it to me when I graduated from high school." "Are you a Canadian?" the third said. He had red hair. "Canadian? You don't talk like them," the second said. "I've heard them talk. He talks like they do in minstrel shows." "Say," the third said, "ain't you afraid he'll hit you?" "Hit me? You said he talks like a colored man." "Oh, dry up," the second said. "You can see the steeple when you get over that hill there." I thanked them. "I hope you have good luck. Only don't catch that old fellow down there. He deserves to be let alone." "Can't anybody catch that fish," the first said. They leaned on the rail, looking down into the water, the 3 poles like 3 slanting threads of yellow fire in the sun. I walked upon my shadow, tramping it into the dappled shade of trees again. The road curved, mounting away from the carrying eye, the mind on ahead beneath a still green tunnel, and the square cupola above the trees, and the round eye of the clock, but far enough. I sat down at the roadside. The grass was ankle-deep, myriad. The shadows on the road were as still as if they had been put there with a stencil, with slanting pencils of sunlight. But it was only a train, and after a while it died away beyond the trees. The long sound, and then I could hear my watch, and the train dying away, as though it were running through another month or another summer somewhere, rushing away under their poised gull, and all things rushing, except Gerald. He would be sort of grand, too, pulling in lonely state across the noon, rowing himself right out of noon, up the long bright air, like an apotheosis, mounting into a drowsing infinity, where only he and the gull, one terrifically motionless, the other in a steady and measured pull and recover that partook of inertia itself, the world puny beneath their shadows on the sun. Caddy, that blackguard Caddy. Their voices came over the hill, and the 3 slender poles like balanced threads of running fire. They looked at me passing, not slowing. "Well," I said, "I don't see him." "We didn't try to catch him," the first said. "You can't catch that fish." "There's the clock," the second said, pointing. "You can tell the time when you get a little closer." "Yes," I said. "All right." I got up. "You all going to town?" "We're going to the Eddy for chub," the first said. "You can't catch anything at the Eddy," the second said. "I guess you want to go to the mill, with a lot of fellows splashing and scaring all the fish away." "You can't catch any fish at the Eddy." "Won't catch none nowhere if we don't go on," the third said. "I don't see why you keep on talking about the Eddy," the second said. "You can't catch anything there." "You don't have to go," the first said. "You're not tied to me." "Let's go to the mill and go swimming," the third said. "I'm going to the Eddy and fish," the first said. "You can do as you please." "Say, how long has it been since you heard of anybody catching a fish at the Eddy?" the second said to the third. "Let's go to the mill and go swimming," the third said. The cupola sank slowly beyond the trees, with the round face of the clock far enough yet. We went on in the dappled shade. We came to an orchard, pink and white. It was full of bees. Already you could hear them. "Let's go to the mill and go swimming," the third said. A lane turned off beside the orchard. The third boy slowed and halted. The first went on, flecks of sunlight slipping along the pole across his shoulder and down the back of his shirt. "Come on," third said. Second boy stopped too. "Why must you marry somebody, Caddy?"
Do you want me to say it? Do you think that if I say it, it won't be?
"Let's go up to the mill," he said. "Come on." First boy went on. His bare feet made no sound, falling softer than leaves in the thin dust. In the orchard, the bees sounded like a wind getting up, a sound caught by a spell just under crescendo and sustained. The lane went along the wall, arched over, shattered with bloom, dissolving into trees. Sunlight slanted into it, sparse and eager. Yellow butterflies flickered along the shade like flecks of sun. "What do you want to go to the eddy for?" the second boy said. "You can fish at the mill if you want to." "Let him go," the third said. They looked after the first boy. Sunlight slid patchily across his walking shoulders, glinting along the pole like yellow ants. "Kenny," the second said, "say it to father, will you? I am my father's progenitor. I invented him and created him. Say it to him. It will not be, for he will say, I was not. And then you and I sense philoprogenitive." "Come on," the boy said. "They're already in." They looked after the first boy. "Yeah," they said suddenly. "Go on then, Mama's boy. If he goes swimming, he'll get his head wet, and then he'll get a licking." They turned into the lane and went on, the yellow butterflies slanting about them along the shade. It is because there is nothing else. I believe there is something else, but there may not be. Then you will find that even injustice is scarcely worthy of what you believe yourself to be. He paid me no attention, his jaw set in profile, his face turned a little away beneath his broken hat. "Why don't you go swimming with them?" I said. "That blackguard, Caddy."
Were you trying to pick a fight with him? Were you?
"A liar and a scoundrel, Caddy. Was dropped from his club for cheating at cards, got sent to Coventry, caught cheating at midterm exams, and expelled."
Well, what about it? I'm not going to play cards with.
"Do you like fishing better than swimming?" I said. The sound of the bees diminished, sustained yet, as though instead of sinking into silence, silence merely increased between us as water rises. The road curved again and became a street between shady lawns with white houses. "Caddy, that blackguard. Can you think of Benji and father, and do it not of me?"
What else can I think about? What else have I thought about?
The boy turned from the street. He climbed a picket fence without looking back and crossed the lawn to a tree, and laid the pole down and climbed into the fork of the tree and sat there, his back to the road, and the dappled sun motionless at last upon his white shirt.
Else have I thought about? I can't even cry. I died last year. I told you I had, but I didn't know then what it meant. I didn't know what I was saying.
Some days in late August at home are like this. The air thin and eager like this, with something in it sad and nostalgic and familiar. Man, the sum of these climatic experiences, Father said. Man, the sum of what have you. A problem in impure properties carried tediously to an unvarying nil. Stalemate of dust and desire.
But now I know. I'm dead, I tell you.
Then why must you? Listen, we can go away, you and Benji and me, where nobody knows us, where... The buggy was drawn by a white horse, his feet clopping in the thin dust, spidery wheels chattering thin and dry, moving uphill beneath a rippling shawl of leaves. Elm.
On what? On your school money? The money they sold the pastor for? So you could go to Harvard? Don't you see? You've got to finish now. If you don't finish, he'll have nothing. Sold the pasture.
His white shirt was motionless in the fork, in the flickering shade. The wheels were spidery. Beneath the sag of the buggy, the hooves neatly rapid like the motions of a lady doing embroidery, diminishing without progress, like a figure on a treadmill being drawn rapidly off stage. The street turned again. I could see the white cupola, the round, stupid assertion of the clock.
Sold the pasture. Father will be dead in a year, they say, if he doesn't stop drinking. And he won't stop. He can't stop. Since last summer. And then they'll send Benji to Jackson. I can't cry. I can't even cry.
1 minute she was standing in the door. The next minute he was pulling at her dress and bellowing, his voice hammered back and forth between the walls and waves, and she shrinking against the wall, getting smaller and smaller, with her white face, her eyes like thumbs dug into it, until he pushed her out of the room, his voice hammering back and forth, as though its own momentum would not let it stop, as though there were no place for it in silence, bellowing. When you opened the door, a bell tinkled, but just once, high and clear and small, in the neat obscurity above the door, as though it were gauged and tempered to make that single clear small sound, so as not to wear the bell out, nor to require the expenditure of too much silence in restoring it, when the door opened upon the recent warm scent of baking. A little dirty child with eyes like a toy bear's, and 2 patent leather pigtails. "Hello, sister." Her face was like a cup of milk, dashed with coffee in the sweet, warm emptiness. "Anybody here?" But she merely watched me until a door opened and the lady came. Above the counter were the ranks of crisp shapes. Behind the glass, her neat gray face, her hair tight and sparse from her neat gray skull. Spectacles and neat gray rims. Riding, approaching like something on a wire, like a cash box in a store. She looked like a librarian, something among dusty shelves of ordered centitudes, long divorced from reality, desiccating peacefully, as if a breath of that air which sees injustice done. "2 of these, please, ma'am." From under the counter she produced a square cut from a newspaper and laid it on the counter, and lifted the 2 buns out. The little girl watched them with still and unwinking eyes, like 2 currants floating motionless in a cup of weak coffee. Land of the kike, home of the wop, watching the bread, the neat gray hands, a broad gold band on the left forefinger, knuckled there by a blue knuckle. "Do you do your own baking, ma'am?"
"Sir."
she said, like that.
"Sir."
"Like on the stage?"
"Sir, 5 cents. Was there anything else?"
"No, ma'am, not for me. This lady wants something. She was not tall enough to see over the case, so she went to the end of the counter and looked at the little girl."
"Did you bring her in here?"
"No, ma'am. She was here when I came."
"You little wretch!"
she said. She came out around the counter, but she didn't touch the little girl.
"Have you got anything in your pockets?"
"She hadn't got any pockets," I said. "She wasn't doing anything. She was just standing here waiting for you."
"Why didn't the bell ring then?"
She glared at me. She just needed a bunch of switches, a blackboard behind her. 2 times 2 equals 5.
"She'll hide it under her dress, and a body'd never know it. You child, how'd you get in here?"
The little girl said nothing. She looked at the woman, then she gave me a flying black glance and looked at the woman again.
"Them foreigners,"
the woman said.
"How'd she get in without the bell ringing?"
"She came in when I opened the door," I said. "It rang once for both of us. She couldn't reach anything from here anyway. Besides, I don't think she would. Would you, sister? The little girl looked at me, secretive, contemplative. What do you want? Bread? She extended her fist. It uncurled upon a nickel, moist and dirty. Moist dirt ridged into her flesh. The coin was damp and warm. I could smell it, faintly metallic. Have you got a 5-cent loaf, please, ma'am? From beneath the counter she produced a square cut from a newspaper sheet and laid it on the counter and wrapped a loaf into it. I laid the coin and another one on the counter. And another one of these buns, please, ma'am. She took another bun from the case.
Give me that parcel,
she said. I gave it to her, and she unwrapped it and put the third bun in and wrapped it and took up the coins and found 2 coppers in her apron and gave them to me. I handed them to the little girl. Her fingers closed about them, damp and hot, like worms.
You going to give her that bun?
The woman said. Yes'm, I said. I expect your cooking smells as good to her as it does to me. I took up the 2 packages and gave the bread to the little girl. The woman, all iron gray behind the counter, watching us with cold certitude.
You wait a minute,
she said. She went to the rear. The door opened again and closed. The little girl watched me, holding the bread against her dirty dress. What's your name? I said. She quit looking at me, but she was still motionless. She didn't even seem to breathe. The woman returned. She had a funny-looking thing in her hand. She carried it sort of like it might have been a dead pet rat.
Here,
she said. The child looked at her.
Take it,
the woman said.
It just looks peculiar. I calculate you won't know the difference when you eat it. Here, I can't stand here all day.
The child took it, still watching her. The woman rubbed her hands on her apron.
I got to have that bell fixed,
she said. She went to the door and jerked it open. The little bell tinkled once, faint and clear and invisible. We moved toward the door, and the woman's peering back. Thank you for the cake, I said.
Them foreigners,
she said, staring up into the obscurity where the bell tinkled.
Take my advice and stay clear of them, young man.
Yes'm, I said. Come on, sister. We went out. Thank you, ma'am. She swung the door to, then jerked it open again, making the bell give forth its single small note.
Foreigners,
she said, peering up at the bell. We went on. Well, I said, how about some ice cream? She was eating the gnarled cake. Do you like ice cream? She gave me a black still look, chewing. Come on. We came to the drugstore and had some ice cream. She wouldn't put the loaf down. Why not put it down so you can eat better, I said, offering to take it. But she held to it, chewing the ice cream like it was taffy. The bitten cake lay on the table. She ate the ice cream steadily. Then she fell to on the cake again, looking about at the showcases. I finished mine and we went out. Which way do you live? I said. A buggy, the one with the white horse, it was. Only Doc Peabody is fat, 300 pounds. You can ride with him on the uphill side holding on, children. Walking easier than holding uphill. Seen the doctor yet? Have you seen Caddy?
I don't have to. I can't ask now. Afterward, it will be all right. It won't matter.
Because women so delicate, so mysterious, Father said. Delicate equilibrium of periodical filth between 2 moons balanced. Moons, he said, full and yellow as harvest moons. Her hips, thighs. Outside of them always, but yellow. Feet soles with walking like. Then know that some man that all those mysterious and imperious concealed, with all that inside of them shapes and outward suavity, waiting for a touch to. Liquid putrefaction like drowned things floating like pale rubber flabbily filled, getting the odor of honeysuckle all mixed up. You'd better take your bread on home, hadn't you? She looked at me. She chewed quietly and steadily, At regular intervals, a small distension passed smoothly down her throat. I opened my package and gave her one of the buns. "Goodbye," I said. I went on. Then I looked back. She was behind me. "Do you live down this way?" She said nothing. She walked beside me, under my elbow sort of, eating. We went on. It was quiet, hardly anyone about. Getting the odor of honeysuckle all mixed. She would have told me not to let me sit there on the steps, hearing her door, twilight slamming, hearing Benji still crying. Supper. She would have to come down then, getting honeysuckle all mixed up in it. We reached the corner. "Well, I've got to go down this way," I said. "Goodbye." She stopped too. She swallowed the last of the cake. Then she began on the bun, watching me across it. "Goodbye," I said. I turned into the street and went on, but I went to the next corner before I stopped. "Which way do you live?" I said. "This way?" I pointed down the street. She just looked at me. "Do you live over that way?" "I bet you live close to the station, where the trains are, don't you?" She just looked at me, serene and secret and chewing. The street was empty both ways, with quiet lawns and houses, neat among the trees, but no one at all except back there. We turned and went back. 2 men sat in chairs in front of a store. "Do you all know this little girl? She sort of took up with me, and I can't find where she lives." They quit looking at me and looked at her. "She must be one of them new Italian families," one said. He wore a rusty frock coat. "I've seen her before. What's your name, little girl?" She looked at them blankly for a while, her jaws moving steadily. She swallowed without ceasing to chew. "Maybe she can't speak English," the other said. "They sent her after bread," I said. "She must be able to speak something." "What's your pa's name?" the first said. "Pete? Joe? Named John, huh?" She took another bite from the bun. "What must I do with her?" I said. "She just follows me. I've got to get back to Boston." "You from the college?" "Yes, sir. And I've got to get on back." "You might go up the street and turn her over to Ant's. He'll be up at the livery stable, the marshal." "I reckon that's what I'll have to do," I said. "I've got to do something with her. Much obliged. Come on, sister." We went up the street on the shady side, where the shadow of the broken facade blotted slowly across the road. We came to the livery stable. The marshal wasn't there. A man sitting in a chair, tilted in the broad, low door, where a dark, cool breeze, smelling of ammonia, blew among the ranked stalls. Said to look at the post office. He didn't know her either. "Them foreigners. I can't tell one from another. You might take her across the tracks where they live, and maybe somebody'll claim her." We went to the post office. It was back down the street. The man in the frock coat was opening a newspaper. "Aunt's just drove out of town," he said. "I guess you'd better go down past the station and walk past them houses by the river. Somebody there'll know her." "I guess I'll have to," I said. "Come on, sister." She pushed the last piece of the bun into her mouth and swallowed it. "Want another?" I said. She looked at me, chewing, her eyes black and unwinking and friendly. I took the other 2 buns out and gave her one, and bit into the other. I asked the man where the station was, and he showed me. "Come on, sister." We reached the station and crossed the tracks, where the river was. A bridge crossed it, and a street of jumbled frame houses followed the river, backed onto it. A shabby street, but with an air of heterogeneous and vivid, too. In the center of an untrimmed plot, enclosed by a fence of gaping and broken pickets, stood an ancient lopsided surrey and a weathered house, from an upper window of which hung a garment of vivid pink. "Does that look like your house?" I said. She looked at me over the bun. "This one?" I said, pointing. She just chewed, but it seemed to me that I discerned something affirmative, acquiescent, even if it wasn't eager, in her air. "This one?" I said. "Come on, then." I entered the broken gate. I looked back at her. "Here?" I said. "This look like your house?" She nodded her head rapidly, looking at me, gnawing into the damp half-moon of the bread. We went on. A walk of broken, random flags, speared by fresh, coarse blades of grass, led to the broken stoop. There was no movement about the house at all, and the pink garment hanging in no wind from the upper window. There was a bell pull with a porcelain knob attached to about 6 feet of wire when I stopped pulling and knocked. The little girl had the crust edgeways in her chewing mouth. A woman opened the door. She looked at me. Then she spoke rapidly to the little girl in Italian, with a rising inflection. Then a pause. Interrogatory. She spoke to her again, the little girl looking at her across the end of the crust, pushing it into her mouth with a dirty hand. "She says she lives here," I said. "I'm headed downtown. Is this your bread?"
No speaker.
The woman said. She spoke to the little girl again. The little girl just looked at her. "No live here?" I said. I pointed to the girl, then at her, then at the door. The woman shook her head. She spoke rapidly. She came to the edge of the porch and pointed down the road, speaking. I nodded violently, too. "You come show," I said. I took her arm, waving my other hand toward the road. She spoke swiftly, pointing. "You come show," I said, trying to lead her down the steps.
See,
she said, holding back, showing me whatever it was. I nodded again. Thanks. I went down the steps and walked toward the gate, not running, but pretty fast. I reached the gate and stopped and looked at her for a while. The crust was gone now, and she looked at me with her black, friendly stare. The woman stood on the stoop watching us. "Come on, then," I said. "We'll have to find the right one sooner or later." She moved along just under my elbow. We went on. The houses all seemed empty, not a soul in sight, a sort of breathlessness that empty houses have. Yet they couldn't all be empty. All the different rooms. If you could just slice the walls away all of a sudden. "Madam, your daughter, if you please." "No, madam, for God's sake, your daughter." She moved along just under my elbow, her shiny, tight pigtails. And then the last house played out, and the road curved out of sight beyond a wall, following the river. The woman was emerging from the broken gate with a shawl over her head and clutched under her chin. The road curved on, empty. I found a coin and gave it to the little girl, a quarter. "Goodbye, sister," I said. Then I ran. I ran fast, not looking back. Just before the road curved away, I looked back. She stood in the road, a small figure, clasping a loaf of bread to her filthy little dress, her eyes still and black and unwinking. I ran on. A lane turned from the road. I entered it, and after a while I slowed to a fast walk. The lane went between back premises, unpainted houses with more of those gay and startling colored garments on lines. A barn, broken back, decaying, quietly among rank orchid trees, unpruned and weed-choked, pink and white and murmurous, with sunlight and with bees. I looked back. The entrance to the lane was empty. I slowed still more, my shadow pacing me, dragging its head through the weeds that hid the fence. The lane went back to a barred gate, became defunctive in grass, a mere path, scarred quietly into new grass. I climbed the gate into a woodlot and crossed it, and came to another wall and followed that one, my shadow behind me now. There were vines and creepers where at home would be honeysuckle, coming and coming, especially in the dusk, when it rained, getting honeysuckle all mixed up in it as though it were not enough without that, not unbearable enough. "What did you let him for?" Kiss.
I didn't let him. I made him.
watching me getting mad.
What do you think of that?
Red print of my hand coming up through her face like turning a light on under your hand. Her eyes going bright. It's not for kissing I slapped you. Girl's elbow at 15. Father said you swallowed like you had a fishbone in your throat. What's the matter with you and Caddy across the table? Not to look at me. It's for letting it be some darn town squirt I slapped you. You will you now? I guess you say. Calf rope. My red hand coming up out of her face. What do you think of that? Scouring her head into the grass. Grass sticks crisscrossed into the flesh, tingling, scouring her head. Say calf rope. Say it. I didn't kiss a dirty girl like Natalie anyway. The wall went into shadow, and then my shadow. I had tricked it again. I had forgot about the river curving along the road. I climbed the wall, and then she watched me jump down, holding the loaf against her dress. I stood in the weeds, and we looked at one another for a while. Why didn't you tell me you lived out this way, sister? The loaf was wearing slowly out of the paper. Already it needed a new one. Well, come on, then, and show me the house. Not a dirty girl like Natalie. It was raining. We could hear it on the roof, sighing through the high, sweet emptiness of the barn. There, touching her.
Not there.
There. Not raining hard, but we couldn't hear anything but the roof, and as if it was my blood or her blood. She pushed me down the ladder and ran off and left me. Caddy did.
Was it there it hurt you when Caddy did ran off? Was it there? Oh.
She walked just under my elbow, the top of her patent leather head, the loaf fraying out of the newspaper. If you don't get home pretty soon, you're going to wear that loaf out. And then what'll your mama say? I bet I can lift you up.
You can't. I'm too heavy.
Did Caddy go away? Did she go to the house? You can't see the barn from our house. Did you ever try to see the barn from there? It was her fault. She pushed me. She ran away. I can lift you up. See how I can?
Oh.
Her blood or my blood?
Oh.
We went on in the thin dust, our feet silent as rubber in the thin dust, where pencils of sun slanted in the trees, and I could feel water again, running swift and peaceful in the secret shade. You're mighty smart to go this far to town by yourself. It's like dancing sitting down. Did you ever dance sitting down? We hear the rain. How do you hold to dance? Do you hold like this?
Oh.
I used to hold like this. You thought I wasn't strong enough, didn't you?
Oh. 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 Oh.
I hoped you used like this. I mean, did you hear what I said? I said,
Oh. 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 Oh.
The road went on, still and empty, the sun slanting more and more. Her stiff little pigtails were bound at the tips with bits of crimson cloth. A corner of wrapping flapped a little as she walked, the nose of the loaf naked. I stopped. Look here. Do you live down this road? We haven't passed a house in a mile almost. She looked at me, black and secret and friendly. Where do you live, sister? Don't you live back there in town? There was a bird somewhere in the woods, beyond the broken and infrequent slanting of sunlight. Your papa's going to be worried about you. Don't you reckon you'll get a whipping for not coming straight home with that bread? The bird whistled again, invisible, a sound meaningless and profound, inflectionless, ceasing as though cut off with the blow of a knife, and again, and that sense of water swift and peaceful above secret places, felt, not seen, not heard. Oh, hell, sister! About half the paper hung limp. That's not doing any good now. I tore it off and dropped it beside the road. Come on. We'll have to go back to town. We'll go back along the river. We left the road. Among the moss little pale flowers grew, and a sense of water, mute and unseen. I hold yous like this, I used to hold. She stood in the door looking at us, her hands on her hips.
You pushed me. It was your fault. It hurt me too.
We were dancing sitting down. I bet Caddy can't dance sitting down.
Stop that. Stop that.
I was just brushing the trash off the back of your dress. You
keep your nasty old hands off of me. It was your fault. You pushed me down. I'm mad at you.
I don't care. She looked at us. Stay mad. She went away. We began to hear the shouts, the splashings. I saw a brown body gleam for an instant. Stay mad. My shirt was getting wet and my hair. Across the roof, hearing the roof loud now, I could see Natalie going through the garden among the rain. Get wet. I hope you catch pneumonia. Go on home, cowface. I jumped hard as I could into the hog wallow. The mud yellowed up to my waist, sinking. I kept on plunging until I fell down and rolled over in it. Hear them in swimming, sister? I wouldn't mind doing that myself, if I had time. When I have time. I could hear my watch. Mud was warmer than the rain. It smelled awful. She had her back turned. I went around in front of her. You know what I was doing? She turned her back. I went around in front of her, the rain creeping into the mud, flattening her bodice through her dress. It smelled horrible. I was hugging her. That's what I was doing. She turned her back. I went around in front of her. I was hugging her, I tell you.
I don't give a damn what you were doing.
You don't? You don't? I'll make you give a damn. She hid my hands away. I smeared mud on her with the other hand. I couldn't feel the wet smacking of her hand. I wiped mud from my legs, smeared it on her wet, hard-turning body, hearing her fingers going into my face. But I couldn't feel it, even when the rain began to taste sweet on my lips. They saw us from the water first, heads and shoulders. They yelled, and one rose, squatting and sprang among them. They looked like beavers, the water lipping about their chins, yelling, "Take that girl away! What did you want to bring a girl here for? Go on away! She won't hurt you. We just want to watch you for a while." They squatted in the water, their heads drew into a clump, watching us. Then they broke and rushed toward us, hurling water with their hands. We moved quick. "Look out, boys. She won't hurt you. Go on away, Harvard." It was the second boy, the one that thought the horse and wagon back there at the bridge. "Splash them, fellows." "Let's get out and throw them in," another said. "I ain't afraid of any girl. Splash them, splash them." They rushed toward us, hurling water. We moved back. "Go on away," they yelled. "Go on away." We went away. They huddled just under the bank, their slick heads in a row against the bright water. We went on. "That's not for us, is it?" The sun slanted through to the moss here and there. Leveler. "Poor kid, you're just a girl." Little flowers grew among the moss, littler than I had ever seen. "You're just a girl, poor kid." There was a path curving along beside the water. Then the water was still again, dark and still and swift. Nothing but a girl, poor sister. We lay in the wet grass panting, the rain like coals shot on my back. "Do you care now? Do you? Do you?" "My Lord, we sure are in a mess. Get up." Where the rain touched my forehead, it began to smart. My hand came red away, streaking off pink in the rain.
Does it hurt?
Of course it does. What do you reckon?
I tried to scratch your eyes out. My Lord, we sure do stink. We'd better try to wash it off in the branch.
There's town again, sister. You'll have to go home now. I've got to get back to school. Look how late it's getting. You'll go home now, won't you? But she just looked at me, with her black, secret, friendly gaze, the half-naked loaf clutched to her breast. It's wet. I thought we jumped back in time. I took my handkerchief and tried to wipe the loaf, but the crust began to come off, so I stopped. We'll just have to let it dry itself. Hold it like this. She held it like that. It looked kind of like rats had been eating it now. And the water building and building up. The squatting bank, the soft mud stinking surface word, pocking the patterned surface like grease on a hot stove. I told you I'd make you.
I don't give a goddamn what you do.
Then we heard the running, and we stopped and looked back and saw him coming up the path, running, the level shadows flicking upon his legs. He's in a hurry. I saw another man, an oldish man, running heavily, clutching a stick, and a boy, naked from the waist up, clutching his pants as he ran.
Yes, Julio,
The little girl said. And then I saw his Italian face and his eyes as he sprang upon me. We went down. His hands were jabbing at my face, and he was saying something and trying to bite me, I reckon. And then they hauled him off and held him, heaving and thrashing and yelling. And they held his arms, and he tried to kick me until they dragged him back. The little girl was howling, holding the loaf in both arms. The half-naked boy was darting and jumping up and down, clutching his trousers, and someone pulled me up in time to see another stark naked figure come around the tranquil bend in the path, running, and change direction in mid-stride, and leap into the woods. A couple of garments rigged as boards behind it. Julio still struggled. The man who had pulled me up said, "Whoa now, we got you." He wore a vest but no coat. Upon it was a metal shield. In his other hand he clutched a knotted polished stick. "You're Arndt, aren't you?" I said. "I was looking for you. What's the matter?" "I warn you that anything you say will be used against you," he said. "You're under arrest." "I kill him," Julio said. He struggled. 2 men held him. The little girl howled steadily, holding the bread. "You stealing my sister," Julio said. "Let go, meesters." "Steal his sister?" I said. "Why, I've been—" "Shut up," Aunt said. "You can tell that to the squire." "Steal his sister," I said. Julio broke from the men and sprang at me again, but the marshal met him and they struggled until the other 2 pinioned his arms again. Ants released him, panting. "You damn furriner," he said. "I've a good mood to take you up to, for assault and battery." He turned to me again. "Will you come peaceable, or do I handcuff you?" "I'll come peaceable," I said. "Anything, just so I can find someone. Do something with—" "Stole his sister," I said. "Stole his—" "I warned you," Aunt said. "He aims to charge you with meditated criminal assault. Here, you make that gal shut up that noise." "Oh," I said. Then I began to laugh. 2 more boys with plastered heads and round eyes came out of the bushes, buttoning shirts they'd already dampened into their shoulders and arms. And I tried to stop the laughter, but I couldn't. "Watch him," Arndt said. "He's crazy, I believe." "I'll have to quit," I said. "It'll stop in a minute." The other time it said, "Ah." I said, laughing. "Let me sit down a while." I sat down, they watching me, and the little girl with her streaked face and gnawed-looking loaf, and the water swift and peaceful below the path. After a while the laughter ran out, but my throat wouldn't quit trying to laugh, like retching after your stomach is empty. "Whoa now," Aunt said. "Get a grip on yourself." "Yes," I said, tightening my throat. There was another yellow butterfly, like one of the sunflakes, had come loose. After a while, I didn't have to hold my throat so tight. I got up. "I'm ready. Which way?" We followed the path, the 2 others watching Julio and the little girl, and the boys somewhere in the rear. The path went along the river to the bridge. We crossed it in the tracks. People coming to the doors to look at us, and more boys materializing from somewhere, until when we turned into the main street, we had quite a procession. Before the drugstore stood an auto. a big one, but I didn't recognize them until Mrs. Bland said,
"Why, Quentin Compson."
Then I saw Gerald and Spode in the back seat, sitting on the back of his neck. And Shreve, I didn't know the two girls.
"Quentin Compson,"
Mrs. Bland said. "Good afternoon," I said, raising my hat. "I'm under arrest. I'm sorry I didn't get your note." "Did Shreve tell you?" "Under arrest?" Shreve said. "Excuse me," he said. He heaved himself up and climbed over their feet and got out. He had on a pair of my flannel pants like a glove. I didn't remember forgetting them. I didn't remember how many chins Mrs. Bland had either. The prettiest girl was with Gerald in front, too. They watched me through veils with a kind of delicate horror. "Who's under arrest?" Shreve said. "What's this, mister?"
"Gerald."
Mrs. Bland said.
"Send these people away. You get in this car, Quentin."
Gerald got out. Spode hadn't moved. "What's he done, Cap?" he said. "Robbed a hen house?" "I warn you," Arse said. "Do you know the prisoner?" "Know him," Shreve said. "Look here." "Then you can come along to the squire's. You're obstructing justice. Come along." He shook my arm. "Well, good afternoon," I said. "I'm glad to have seen you all. Sorry I couldn't be with you."
"You, Gerald,"
Mrs. Bland said. "Look here, Constable," Gerald said. "I'm warning you you're interfering with an officer of the law," Aunt said. "If you've anything to say, you can come to the squire's and make cognizance of the prisoner." We went on. Quite a procession now, Aunts and I leading. I could hear them telling him what it was, and Spode asking questions, and then Julio said something violently in Italian, and I looked back and saw the little girl standing at the curb, looking at me with her friendly, inscrutable regard. "Get on home," Julio shouted at her. "I beat hell out of you." We went down the street and turned into a bit of a lawn in which, set back from the street, stood a one-story building of brick trimmed with white. We went up the rock path to the door where Aunts halted everyone, except us, and made them remain outside. We entered a bare room smelling of stale tobacco. There was a sheet-iron stove in the center of a wooden frame filled with sand, and a faded map on the wall, and the dingy plaid of a township. Behind a scarred-littered table, a man with a fierce roach of iron-gray hair peered at us over steel spectacles. "Got him, did you, Aunts?" he said. "Got him, Squire." He opened a huge, dusty book and drew it into him, and dipped a foul pen into the inkwell filled with what looked like coal dust. "Look here, mister," Shreve said. "The prisoner's name," the squire said. I told him. He wrote it slowly into the book, the pen scratching with excruciating deliberation. "Look here, mister," Shreve said. "We know this fellow. We—" "Order in the court," Aunt said. "Shut up, Bud," Spode said. "Let him do it his way. He's going to anyway." "Age?" the squire said. I told him. He wrote that, his mouth moving as he wrote. "Occupation," I told him. "Harvard student, eh?" he said. He looked up at me, bowing his neck a little to see over the spectacles. His eyes were clear and cold like a goat's. "What are you up to, coming out here kidnapping children?" "They're crazy, Squire," Shreve said. "Whoever says this boy's kidnapping?" Julio moved violently. "Crazy," he said. "Don't I kitchen him? Don't I see way of my own eyes?" "He's a liar," Shreve said. "You never—" "Order, order," Lawrence said, raising his voice. "You fellers shut up," the squire said. "If they don't stay quiet, turn 'em out, Lawrence." They got quiet. The squire looked at Shreve, then at Spode, then at Gerald. "You know this young man?" he said to Spode. "Yes, your honor," Spode said. "He's just a country boy in school up there. He don't mean any harm. I think the marshal will find it's a mistake. His father's a congregational minister." The squire said. "What was you doing exactly?" I told him, he watching me with his cold, pale eyes. "How about an Ants?" "Might have been," Ants said. "Them dern foreigners." "I American," Julio said. "I got it a baby." "Where's the gal?" "He sent her home," Ants said. "Was she scared or anything?" "Not till Julio there jumped on the prisoner. They were just walking along the river path towards town. Some boy swimming told us which way they went." "It's a mistake, Squire," Spode said. "Children and dogs are always taking up with him like that. He can't help it." Squire said. He looked out the window for a while. We watched him. I could hear Julio scratching himself. Squire looked back. "Are you satisfied the gal ain't took any hurt? You there?" "No hurt now," Julio said sullenly. "You quit work to hunt for her." "Sure, I quit. I run like hell. Looky here, look at there. Then man tellin' me he see him give her hers to eat. She go with you." Squire said. "Well, son, I calculate you owe Julio something for taking him away from his work." "Yes, sir," I said. "How much?" $1, I calculate." I gave Julio $1. "Well," Spode said, "if that's all, I reckon he's discharged, Your Honor." Squire didn't look at him. "How far did you run him, Ernst?" 2 miles at least. It was about 2 hours before we caught him." Squire said. He mused a while. We watched him, his stiff crest, the spectacles riding low on his nose. The yellow shape of the window grew slowly across the floor, reached the wall, climbing. Dust motes whirled and slanted. $6. $6, Shreve said. "What's that for?" $6, the squire said. He looked at Shreve a moment, then at me again. "Look here," Shreve said. "Shut up," Spode said. "Give it to him, Bud. Then let's get out of here. The ladies are waiting for us. You got $6? "Yes," I said. I gave him $6. "Case dismissed," he said. "You got a receipt?" Shreve said. "You got a signed receipt for that money?" Squire looked at Shreve mildly. "Case dismissed," he said without raising his voice. "I'll be damned," Shreve said. "Come on here," Spode said, taking his arm. "Good afternoon, Judge. Much obliged." As we passed out the door, Julio's voice rose again, violent, then ceased. Spode was looking at me, his brown eyes quizzical, a little cold. "Well, Bud, I reckon you'll do your girl chasing in Boston after this." "You damn fool," Shreve said. "What the hell do you mean, anyway, straggling off there? Fooling with these damn wops?" "Come on," Spode said. "They must be getting impatient." Mrs. Bland was talking to them. They were Miss Holmes and Miss Dangerfield, and they quit listening to her and looked at me again with that delicate and curious horror, their veils turned back upon their little white noses, and their eyes fleeing and mysterious beneath their veils.
"Quentin Compson,"
Mrs. Bland said.
"what would your mother say? A young man naturally gets into scrapes, but to be arrested on foot by a country policeman? What did they think he'd done, Gerald?"
"Nothing," Gerald said.
"Nonsense. What was it? You, Spode."
"He was trying to kidnap that little dirty girl, but they caught him in time," Spode said.
"Nonsense,"
Mrs. Bland said, but her voice sort of died away, and she stared at me for a moment, and the girls drew their breath in with a soft, concerted sound.
"Fiddlesticks,"
Mrs. Bland said briskly.
"if that isn't just like these ignorant, low-class Yankees. Get in, Quentin."
Shreve and I sat on 2 small collapsible seats. Gerald cranked the car and got in, and we started.
Now, Quentin, you tell me what all this foolishness is about.
Mrs. Bland said. I told them. Shreve hunched and furious on his little seat, and Spode sitting again on the back of his neck beside Miss Dangerfield. And the joke is, all the time Quentin had us all fooled, Spode said. All the time we thought he was the model youth that anybody would trust a daughter with, until the police showed him up at his nefarious work.
Hush up, Spode,
Mrs. Bland said. We drove down the street and crossed the bridge and past the house where the pink garment hung in the window.
That's what you get for not reading my note. Why didn't you come and get it? Mr. Mackenzie says he told you it was there.
Yes, I intended to, but I never went back to the room.
You'd have let us sit there waiting I don't know how long. If it hadn't been for Mr. Mackenzie, when he said you hadn't come back, that left an extra place, so we asked him to come. We're very glad to have you anyway, Mr. Mackenzie.
Shreve said nothing. His arms were folded, and he glared straight ahead, past Gerald's cap. It was a cap for motoring in England. Mrs. Bland said so. We passed that house and 3 others in another yard where the little girl stood by the gate. She didn't have the bread now, and her face looked like it had been streaked with coal dust. I waved my hand, but she made no reply. Only her head turned slowly as the car passed, following us with her unwinking gaze. Then we ran beside the wall, our shadows running along the wall, and after a while we passed a piece of torn newspaper lying beside the road, and I began to laugh again. I could feel it in my throat, and I looked off into the trees, where the afternoon slanted, thinking of afternoon and the bird and the boys in swimming. But still I couldn't stop it, and then I knew that if I tried too hard to stop it, I'd be crying, and I thought about how I'd thought about I could not be a virgin, with so many of them walking along in shadows and whispering with their soft girl voices, lingering in the shadowy places and the words coming out, and perfume and eyes you could feel, not see. But if it was that simple to do, it wouldn't be anything. And if it wasn't anything, what was I? And then Mrs. Bland said,
Quentin, is he sick, Mr. Mackenzie?
And then Shreve's fat hand touched my knee, and Spode began talking, and I quit trying to stop it.
If that hamper is in the way, Mr. Mackenzie, move it over on your side. I brought a hamper of wine because I think young gentlemen should drink wine, although my father, Gerald's grandfather...
Ever do that? Have you ever done that? In the great darkness, a little light, her hands locked about. They do when they can get it, Spode said. Hey, Shreve. Knees, her face looking at the sky, the smell of honeysuckle upon her face and throat. Beer, too, Shreve said. His hand touched my knee again. I moved my knee again. Like a thin wash of lilac-colored paint, talking about him bringing. You're not a gentleman, Spode said. Between us until the shape of her blurred, not with dark. No, I'm Canadian, Shreve said. Talking about him, the oar blades winking him along, winking the cap, made for motoring in England, and all the time rushing beneath, and they too blurred, within the other, forevermore. He had been in the army and killed men.
I adore Canada,
Miss Dangerfield said.
I think it's marvelous.
Did you ever drink perfume? Spode said. With one hand he could lift her to his shoulder and run with her, running. No, Shreve said. Running the beast with 2 backs, and she blurred in the winking oars, running the swine of Euboleus, running. Coupled with how many, Caddy? Neither did I, Spode said.
I don't know. Too many. There was something terrible in me, terrible in me.
Father, I have committed. Have you ever done that? We didn't do that. Did we do that?
And Gerald's grandfather always picked his own mint before breakfast, while the dew was still on it. He wouldn't even let old Wilkie touch it. Do you remember Gerald? But always gathered it himself and made his own julep. He was as crotchety about his julep as an old maid, measuring everything by a recipe in his head. There was only one man he ever gave that recipe to. That was...
We did. How can you not know it? If you will just wait, I'll tell you how it was. It was a crime. We did a terrible crime. It cannot be hid. You think it can, but wait.
Poor Quentin, you've never done that, have you? Poor Quentin, you've never done that, have you?
And I'll tell you how it was. I'll tell Father. Then it'll have to be because you love Father. Then we'll have to go away amid the pointing and the horror, the clean flame. I'll make you say we did. I'm stronger than you. I'll make you know we did. You thought it was them, but it was me. Listen, I fooled you all the time. It was me. You thought I was in the house, where that damn honeysuckle, trying not to think to swing the cedars, the secret surges, the breathing, locked drinking, the wild breath, the yes, 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 yes.
Never be. Got to drink wine himself. But he always said that a hamper... What book did you read that in? The one where Gerald's rowing suit of wine was a necessary part of any gentleman's picnic basket.
Did you love them, Caddy? Did you love them?
When they touched me, I died.
1 minute she was standing there. The next, he was yelling and pulling at her dress. They went into the hall and up the stairs, yelling and shoving her to the bathroom door, stopping her back against the door with her arm across her face, yelling and trying to shove her into the bathroom. When she came into supper, T.P. was feeding him. He started again, just whimpering at first, until she touched him. Then he yelled. She stood there, her eyes like cornered rats. Then I was running in the gray darkness. It smelled of rain and all flower scents. The damp, warm air released, and crickets sawing away in the grass, pacing me with a small, traveling island of silence. Fancy watched me across a fence, blotchy like a quilt on a line. I thought, damn that nigger. He forgot to feed her again. I ran down the hill in that vacuum of crickets like a breath traveling across a mirror. She was lying in the water, her head on the sandspit, the water flowing about her hips. There was a little more light in the water. Her skirt, half saturated, plopped along her flanks to the water's motion in heavy ripples, going nowhere, renewing themselves of their own movement. I stood on the bank. I could smell the honeysuckle on the water's gap. The air seemed to drizzle with honeysuckle and the rasping of crickets, a substance you could feel on the flesh.
Is Benji still crying?
I don't know. Yes, I don't know.
Poor Benji.
I sat down on the bank. The grass was damp a little. Then I found my shoes wet. Get out of that water. Are you crazy? But she didn't move. Her face was a white blur, framed out of the blur of the sand by her hair. Get out now. She sat up. Then she rose. Her skirt flopped against her, draining. She climbed the bank, her clothes flopping, and sat down. Why don't you wring it out? Do you want to catch cold?
Yes.
The water sucked and gurgled across the sandspit, and on in the dark among the willows. Across the shallow, the water rippled like a piece of cloth holding still, a little light, as water does.
He's crossed all the oceans all around the world.
Then she talked about him clasping her wet knees, her face tilted back in the gray light, the smell of honeysuckle. There was a light in Mother's room and in Benji's where T.P. was putting him to bed. "Do you love him?" Her hand came out. I didn't move. It fumbled down my arm, and she held my hand flat against her chest, her heart thudding.
No, no.
"Did he make you?" "Then he made you do it. Let him. He was stronger than you, and tomorrow I'll kill him. I swear I will. Father needn't know until afterward, and then you and I, nobody need ever know. We can take my school money. We can cancel my matriculation. Caddy, you hate him, don't you? Don't you?" She held my hand against her chest, her heart thudding. I turned and caught her arm. "Caddy, you hate him, don't you?" She moved my hand up against her throat. Her heart was hammering there.
Poor Quentin.
Her face looked at the sky. It was low, so low that all smells and sounds of night seemed to have been crowded down, like under a slack tent, especially the honeysuckle. It had got into my breathing. It was on her face and throat like paint. Her blood pounded against my hand. I was leaning on my other arm. It began to jerk and jump, and I had to pant to get any air at all out of that thick gray honeysuckle.
Yes, I hate him. I would die for him. I've already died for him. I'd die for him over and over again, every time this goes.
When I lifted my hand, I could still feel crisscrossed twigs and grass burning into the palm.
Poor Quentin.
She leaned back on her arms, her hands locked about her knees.
You've never done that, have you?
What? Done what?
That what I have, what I did.
Yes, lots of times, with lots of girls. Then I was crying. Her hand touched me again, and I was crying against her damp blouse. Then she, lying on her back, looking past my head into the sky. I could see a rim of white under her irises. I opened my knife. "Do you remember the day Demity died? When you sat down in the water in your drawers?"
Yes.
I held the point of the knife at her throat. "It won't take but a second, just a second. Then I can do mine. I can do mine then."
All right. Can you do yours by yourself?
"Yes, the blade's long enough. Benji's in bed by now. It won't take but a second. I'll try not to hurt."
All right.
"Will you close your eyes?"
No, like this. You'll have to push it harder.
"Touch your hand to it." But she didn't move. Her eyes were wide open, looking past my head at the sky. "Caddy, do you remember how Dilsey fussed at you because your drawers were muddy?"
Don't cry.
"I'm not crying."
Push it. Are you going to?
"Do you want me to?"
Yes, push it.
"Touch your hand to it."
Don't cry, poor Quentin.
But I couldn't stop. She held my head against her damp, hard breast. I could hear her heart going firm and slow now, not hammering, and the water gurgling among the willows in the dark, and waves of honeysuckle coming up the air. My arm and shoulder were twisted under me.
What is it? What are you doing?
Her muscles gathered. I sat up. "It's my knife. I dropped it." She sat up.
What time is it?
"I don't know." She rose to her feet. I fumbled along the ground.
I'm going to let it go.
I could feel her standing there. I could smell her damp clothes, feeling her there. "It's right here somewhere."
Let it go. You can find it tomorrow. Come on.
"Wait a minute. I'll find it."
Are you afraid too?
"Here it is. It was right here all the time."
Was it? Come on.
I got up and followed. We went up the hill, the crickets hushing before us. It's funny how you can sit down and drop something and have to hunt all around for it, the gray. It was gray, with dew slanting up into the gray sky. Then the trees beyond. Damn that honeysuckle. I wish it would stop.
You used to like it.
We crossed the crest and went on toward the trees. She walked into me. She gave over a little. The ditch was a black scar on the gray grass. She walked into me again. She looked at me and gave over. We reached the ditch. Let's go this way.
What for?
Let's see if we can still see Nancy's bones. I haven't thought to look in a long time. Have you? It was matted with vines and briars dark. They were right here. You can't tell whether you see them or not, can you?
Stop, Quentin.
Come on. The ditch narrowed, closed. She turned toward the trees.
Stop, Quentin.
Caddy. I got in front of her again. Caddy.
Stop it.
I held her. I'm stronger than you. She was motionless, hard, unyielding. But still.
I won't fight. Stop. You'd better stop.
Caddy. Don't, Caddy.
It won't do any good. Don't you know it won't? Let me go.
The honeysuckle drizzled and drizzled. I could hear the crickets watching us in a circle. She moved back, went around me, on toward the trees.
You go on back to the house. You needn't come.
I went on.
Why don't you go on back to the house?
Damn that honeysuckle. We reached the fence. She crawled through. I crawled through. When I rose from stooping, he was coming out of the trees into the gray toward us, coming toward us, tall and flat and still, even moving like he was still. She went to him.
This is Quentin. I'm wet. I'm wet all over. You don't have to if you don't want to.
Their shadows. One shadow, her head rose. It was above his on the sky. Higher. Their two heads.
You don't have to if you don't want to.
Then, not two heads. The darkness smelled of rain, of damp grass and leaves. The gray light drizzling like rain, the honeysuckle coming up in damp waves. I could see her face, a blur against his shoulder. He held her in one arm, like she was no bigger than a child. He extended his hand. Glad to know you. We shook hands. Then we stood there, her shadow high against his shadow, one shadow.
What are you going to do, Quentin?
Walk a while. I think I'll go through the woods to the road and come back through town. I turned away, going. Good night.
Quentin.
I stopped. What do you want? In the woods, the tree frogs were going, smelling rain in the air. They sounded like toy music boxes that were hard to turn, and the honeysuckle.
Come here.
What do you want?
Come here, Quentin.
I went back. She touched my shoulder, leaning down her shadow, the blur of her face, leaning down from his eyeshadow. I drew back. Look out.
You go on home.
I'm not sleepy. I'm going to take a walk.
Wait for me at the branch.
I'm going for a walk.
I'll be there soon. Wait for me. You wait.
No, I'm going through the woods. I didn't look back. The tree frogs didn't pay me any mind. The gray light like moss in the trees, drizzling. But still, it wouldn't rain. After a while, I turned and went back to the edge of the woods. As soon as I got there, I began to smell honeysuckle again. I could see the lights on the courthouse clock and the glare of town, the square in the sky, the dark willows along the branch, and the light in Mother's windows. The light still on in Benji's room. I stooped through the fence and ran across the pasture. I ran in the gray grass among the crickets, the honeysuckle getting stronger and stronger, and the smell of water. Then I could see the water, the color of gray honeysuckle. I lay down on the bank with my face close to the ground so I couldn't smell the honeysuckle. I couldn't smell it then, and I lay there feeling the earth going through my clothes, listening to the water. After a while I wasn't breathing so hard, and I lay there thinking that if I didn't move my face, I wouldn't have to breathe hard and smell it. And then I wasn't thinking about anything at all. She came along the bank and stopped. I didn't move. It's late. You go home.
What?
You go on home. It's late.
All right.
Her clothes rustled. I didn't move. They stopped rustling. Are you going like I told you? I didn't hear anything. Caddy.
Yes, I will. If you want me to, I will.
I sat up. She was sitting on the ground, her hands clasped about her knee. Go on to the house, like I told you.
Yes, I'll do anything you want me to. Anything. Yes.
She didn't even look at me. I caught her shoulder and shook her hard. You shut up. I shook her. You shut up. You shut up.
Yes.
She lifted her face. Then I saw she wasn't even looking at me at all. I could see that white rim. Get up. I pulled her. She was limp. I lifted her to her feet. Go on now.
Was Benji still crying when you left?
Go on. We crossed the branch. The roof came in sight, then the windows upstairs. He's asleep now. I had to stop and fasten the gate. She went on in the gray light, the smell of rain, and still it wouldn't rain, and honeysuckle, beginning to come from the garden fence. Beginning. She went into the shadow. I could hear her feet then. Caddy? I stopped at the steps. I couldn't hear her feet. Caddy. I heard her feet. Then my hand touched her. Not warm, not cool, just still. Her clothes a little damp still. Do you love him now? Not breathing, except slow, like faraway breathing. Caddy, do you love him now?
I don't know.
Outside, the gray light, the shadows of things like dead things and stagnant water. I wish you were dead.
Do you? You coming in now?
Are you thinking about him now?
I don't know.
Tell me what you're thinking about. Tell me.
Stop. Stop, Quentin.
You shut up. You shut up. You hear me? You shut up. Are you going to shut up?
All right, I will stop. We'll make too much noise.
I'll kill you. Do you hear?
Let's go out to the swing. They'll hear you here.
I'm not crying. Do you say I'm crying?
No, hush now. We'll wake Benji up.
You go on into the house. Go on now.
I am. Don't cry. I'm bad anyway. You can't help it.
There's a curse on us. It's not our fault, is it? Our fault?
Hush, come on, and go to bed now.
You can't make me. There's a curse on us. Finally, I saw him. He was just going into the barber shop. He looked out. I went on and waited. I've been looking for you 2 or 3 days. You wanted to see me? I'm going to see you. He rolled his cigarette quickly with about 2 motions. He struck the match with his thumb. We can't talk here. Suppose I meet you somewhere. I'll come to your room. Are you at the hotel? No, that's not so good. You know that bridge over the creek in there back of... Yes, all right. At 1 o'clock, right? Yes. I turned away. I'm obliged to you. Look. I stopped and looked back. She all right? He looked like he was made out of bronze in his khaki shirt. She need me for anything now? I'll be there at 1. She heard me tell T.P. to saddle Prince at 1 o'clock. She kept watching me, not eating much. She came to.
What are you going to do?
Nothing. Can't I go for a ride if I want to?
You're going to do something. What is it?
None of your business, whore. Whore. T.P. had Prince at the side door. I won't want him. I'm going to walk. I went down the drive and out the gate. I turned into the lane, and then I ran. Before I reached the bridge, I saw him leaning on the rail. The horse was hitched in the woods. He looked over his shoulders, then he turned his back. He didn't look up until I came onto the bridge and stopped. He had a piece of bark in his hands, breaking pieces from it and dropping them over the rail into the water. "Came to tell you to leave town." He broke a piece of bark, deliberately dropped it carefully into the water, and watched it float away. I said, "You must leave town." He looked at me. "Did she send you to me?" "I say you must go, not my father, not anybody. I say it. Listen, save this for a while. I want to know if she's all right. Have they been bothering her up there? That's something you don't need to trouble yourself about." Then I heard myself saying, "I'll give you until sundown to leave town." He broke a piece of bark and dropped it into the river. Then he laid the bark on the rail and rolled a cigarette with those two swift motions and spun the match over the rail. "What will you do if I don't leave?" "I'll kill you. Don't think that just because I look like a kid to you." The smoke flowed in two jets from his nostrils across his face. "How old are you?" I began to shake. My hands were on the rail. I thought if I hid them, he'd know why. "I'll give you until tonight." "Listen, buddy, what's your name?" "Benji's the natural, isn't he?" "You are?" "Quentin." My mouth said it. I didn't say it at all. "I'll give you till sundown." "Quentin?" He raked his cigarette ash carefully off against the rail. He did it slowly and carefully, like sharpening a pencil. My hands quit shaking. "Listen, it's no good taking it so hard. It's not your fault, kid. It would have been some other fellow. Did you ever have a sister? Did you?" "No, but they're all bitches." I hit him. My open hand beat the impulse to shut it to his face. His hand moved as fast as mine. The cigarette went over the rail. Swung with the other hand. He caught it too before the cigarette reached the water. He held both my wrists in the same hand. His other hand flicked to his armpit, under his coat behind him. The sun slanted, and a bird was singing somewhere beyond. Sun. We looked at one another while the bird was singing. He turned my hands loose. "Look here." He took the bark from the rail and dropped it into the water. Bobbed up. The current took it, floated away. His hand lay on the rail, holding the pistol loosely. We waited. "You can't hit it now." "No." It floated on. It was quite still in the woods. I heard the bird again in the water. Then the pistol came up. He didn't aim at all. The bark disappeared. Then pieces of it floated up, spreading. He hit two more pieces of bark no bigger than silver dollars. "That's enough, I guess." He swung the cylinder out and blew into the barrel. A thin wisp of smoke dissolved. He reloaded the 3 chambers, shut the cylinder, and handed it to me butt first. "What for?" "I won't try to beat that. You'll need it, from what you said. I'm giving you this one because you've seen what it'll do." "To hell with your gun." I hit him. I was still trying to hit him long after he was holding my wrist, but I still tried then. It was like I was looking at him through a piece of colored glass. I could hear my blood, and then I could see the sky again, branches against it, and the sun slanting through them, and he holding me on my feet. "Did you hit me?" I couldn't hear. "What?" "Yes." "How do you feel?" "All right." "Let go." He let me go. I leaned against the rail. "Do you feel all right?" "Let me alone." "I'm all right." "Can you make it home all right?" "Go on, let me alone." "You'd better not try to walk. Take my horse." "No, you go on. You can hang the reins on his pommel and turn him loose. He'll go back to the stable." "Let me alone." "You go on and let me alone." I leaned on the rail, looking at the water. I heard him untie the horse and ride off, and after a while I couldn't hear anything but the water and then the bird again. I left the bridge and sat down with my back against a tree and shut my eyes. A patch of sun came through and fell across my eyes, and I moved a little further around the tree. I heard the bird again and the water, and then everything sort of rolled away. I didn't feel anything at all. Felt almost good after all those days and the nights with honeysuckle coming up out of the darkness into my room where I was trying to sleep. Even when after a while I knew that he hadn't hit me, that he had lied about that for her sake too, and that I had just passed out like a girl. Even that didn't matter anymore. I sat there against a tree with little flecks of sunlight rushing across my face like yellow leaves on a twig, listening to the water and not thinking about anything at all. Even when I heard the horse coming fast, I sat there with my eyes closed and heard its feet march scuttling at the hissing sand, and feet running, and her hard running hands.
Fool, fool, are you hurt?
I opened my eyes, her hands running on my face.
I didn't know which way until I heard the pistol. I didn't know where. I didn't think he and you running off slipping. I didn't think he would have.
She held my face between her hands, bumping my head against the tree. Stop that. I caught her wrist. Quit that. Quit it.
I knew he wouldn't. I knew he wouldn't.
She tried to bump my head against a tree.
I told him never to speak to me again. I told him.
She tried to break her wrist free.
Let me go.
Stop it. I'm stronger than you. Stop it now.
Let me go. I've got to go catch him and ask his. Let me go, Quentin. Please, let me go. Let me go.
All at once, she quit. Her wrist went lax.
Yes, I can tell him. I can make him believe anytime. I can make him.
Caddy. She hadn't hitched Prince. He was liable to strike out for home if the notion took him.
Anytime he will believe me.
Do you love him, Caddy?
Do I what?
She looked at me then. Everything emptied out of her eyes, and they looked like the eyes in the statues, blank and unseeing and serene.
Put your hand against my throat.
She took my hand and held it flat against her throat.
Now, say his name.
Dalton Ames. I felt the first surge of blood there. It surged in strong, accelerating beats.
Say it again.
Her face looked off into the trees where the sun slanted and where the bird.
Say it again.
Dalton Ames. Her blood surged steadily, beating and beating against my hand. It kept on running for a long time, but my face felt cold, sort of dead, and my eye and the cut place on my finger was smarting again. I could hear Shreve working the pump. Then he came back with the basin and a round blob of twilight wobbling in it, with a yellow edge like a fading balloon. Then my reflection. I tried to see my face in it. "Has it stopped?" Shreve said. "Give me the rag." He tried to take it from my hand. "Look out," I said. "I can do it. Yes, it's about stopped now." I dipped the rag again, breaking the balloon. The rag stained the water. I wish I had a clean one. "You need a piece of beefsteak for that eye," Shreve said. "Damn if you won't have a shiner tomorrow. That son of a bitch," he said. Did I hurt him, eh? I wrung out the handkerchief and tried to clean the blood off my vest. "You can't get that off," Shreve said. "You'll have to send it to the cleaners. Come on, hold it on your eye, why don't you?" "I can get some of it off," I said, but I wasn't doing much good. "What sort of shape is my collar in?" "I don't know," Shreve said. "Hold it against your eye. Here, look out," I said. "I can do it." Did I hurt him, eh? It may have hit him. I may have looked away just then or blinked or something. He boxed the hell out of you. He boxed you all over the place. What did you want to fight him with your fist for, you goddamn fool? How do you feel?" "I feel fine," I said. "I wonder if I can get something to clean my vest." "Oh, forget your damn clothes. Does your eye hurt?" "I feel fine," I said. Everything was sort of violet and still. the sky green paling into gold beyond the gable of the house, and a plume of smoke rising from the chimney without any wind. I heard the pump again. A man was filling a pail, watching us across his pumping shoulder. A woman crossed the door, but she didn't look out. I could hear a cow lowing somewhere. "Come on," Shreve said. "Let your clothes alone and put that rag on your eye. I'll send your suit out first thing tomorrow." "All right. I'm sorry I didn't bleed on him a little, at least." "Son of a bitch," Shreve said. Spode came out of the house, talking to the woman, I reckon, and crossed the yard. He looked at me with his cold, quizzical eyes. "Well, Bud," he said, looking at me, "I'll be damned if you don't go to a lot of trouble to have your fun. Kidnapping, then fighting. What do you do on your holidays, burn houses?" "I'm all right," I said. "What did Mrs. Bland say?" "She's giving Gerald hell for bloodying you up. She'll give you hell for letting him, when she sees you. She don't object to the fighting. It's the blood that annoys her. I think you lost caste with her a little by not holding your blood better. How do you feel?" "Sure," Shreve said. "If you can't beat a Bland, the next best thing is to commit adultery with one or get drunk and fight him, as the case may be." "Quite right," Spode said. "But I didn't know Quentin was drunk." "He wasn't," Shreve said. "Do you have to be a drunk to want to hit that son of a bitch?" "Well, I think I'd have to be pretty drunk to try it after seeing how Quentin came out." "Where do you learn to box?" "He's been going to Mike's every day over in town," I said. "Has he?" Spode said. "Did you know that when you hit him?" "I don't know," I said. "I guess so, yes." "Wet it again," Shreve said. "Want some fresh water?" "No, this is all right," I said. I dipped the cloth again and held it to my eye. Wish I had something to clean my vest. Spode was still watching me. "Hey," he said, "what did you hit him for? What was it he said?" "I don't know. I don't know why I did." "The first thing I knew was when you jumped up all of a sudden and said, 'Did you ever have a sister? Did you?' And when he said no, you hit him. I noticed you kept on looking at him, but you didn't seem to be paying any attention to what anybody was saying until you jumped up and asked him if he had any sisters." He was blown off as usual," Shreve said, "about his women. You know, like he does, before girls, so they don't know exactly what he's saying. All his damn innuendo and lying and a lot of stuff that don't make sense even. Telling us about some wench that he made a date with to meet at a dance hall in Atlantic City, and stood her up, and went to the hotel and went to bed, and how he lay there being sorry for her waiting on the pier for him, without him there to give her what she wanted, talking about the body's beauty and the sorry ends thereof, and how tough women have it, without anything else they can do except lie on their backs. Lita lurking in the bushes, whimpering and moaning for the swan, see? Oh, son of a bitch, I'd hit him myself, only I'd grabbed up her damn hamper of wine and done it if it had been me." "Oh," Spode said, "the champion of dames. But you excite not only admiration, but horror." He looked at me, cold and quizzical. "Good God," he said. "I'm sorry I hit him," I said. "Do I look too bad to go back and get it over with? Apologies? Hell." Shreve said, "Let them go to hell. We're going to town. He ought to go back so they'll know he fights like a gentleman," Spode said. "Gets licked like one, I mean." "Like this?" Shreve said, "with his clothes all over, blood." "Well, all right," Spode said. "You know best." "He can't go around in his undershirt," Shreve said. "He's not a senior yet. Come on, let's go to town." "You needn't come," I said. "You go back to the picnic." "Hell with them," Shreve said. "Come on here." "What'll I tell them?" Spode said. "Tell them you and Quentin had a fight too?" "Tell them nothing," Shreve said. Tell her option expired at sunset. Come on, Quentin. I'll ask that woman where the nearest interurban—" "No," I said. "I'm not going back to town." Shreve stopped, looking at me. Turning, his glasses looked like small yellow moons. "What are you going to do?" "I'm not going back to town yet. You go on back to the picnic. Tell them I wouldn't come back because my clothes are spoiled." "Look here," he said. "What are you up to?" "Nothing. I'm all right. You and Spode go on back. I'll see you tomorrow." I went on across the yard toward the road. "Do you know where the station is?" Shreve said. "I'll find it. I'll see you all tomorrow. Tell Mrs. Bland I'm sorry I spoiled her party." They stood watching me. I went around the house. A rock path went down to the road. Roses grew on both sides of the path. I went through the gate, onto the road. It dropped downhill toward the woods, and I could make out the auto beside the road. I went up the hill. The light increased as I mounted, and before I reached the top I heard a car. It sounded far away across the twilight, and I stopped and listened to it. I couldn't make out the auto any longer, but Shreve was standing in the road before the house, looking up the hill. Behind him the yellow light lay like a wash of paint on the roof of the house. I lifted my hand and went on over the hill, listening to the car. Then the house was gone, and I stopped in the green and yellow light and heard the car growing louder and louder, until just as it began to die away, it ceased altogether. I waited until I heard it start again. Then I went on. As I descended, the light dwindled slowly, yet at the same time without altering its quality, as if I and not light were changing, decreasing, though even when the road ran into trees you could have read a newspaper. Pretty soon I came to a lane, turned into it. It was closer and darker than the road, but when it came out at the trolley stop, another wooden marquee. The light was still unchanged. After the lane it seemed brighter, as though I had walked through night in the lane and come out into morning again. Pretty soon the car came along. I got on it. They, turning to look at my eye, and found a seat on the left side. The lights were on in the car, so while we ran between trees, I couldn't see anything except my own face and a woman across the aisle with a hat sitting right on top of her head, with a broken feather in it. But when we ran out of the trees, I could see the twilight again, that quality of light as if time really had stopped for a while, with the sun hanging just under the horizon. And then we passed the marquee where the old man had been eating out of the sack, and the road going on under the twilight, into twilight, and the sense of water, peaceful and swift beyond. Then the car went on, the draft building steadily up in the open door, until it was drawing steadily through the car with the odor of summer and darkness, except honeysuckle. Honeysuckle was the saddest odor of all, I think. I remember lots of them. Wisteria was one. On the rainy days when Mother wasn't feeling quite bad enough to stay away from the windows, we used to play under it. When Mother stayed in bed, Dilsey would put whole clothes on us and let us go out in the rain, because she said rain never hurt young folks. But if Mother was up, we always began by playing on the porch until she said we were making too much noise. Then we went out and played under the wisteria frame. This was where I saw the river for the last time this morning. About here. I could feel the water beyond the twilight smell. When it bloomed in the spring and it rained, the smell was everywhere. You didn't notice it so much at other times. But when it rained, the smell began to come into the house at twilight. Either it would rain more at twilight, or there was something in the light itself. But it always smelled strongest then, until I would lie in bed thinking, when will it stop? When will it stop? The draft in the door smelled of water, a damp, steady breath. Sometimes I could put myself to sleep saying that over and over until after the honeysuckle got all mixed up in it, the whole thing came to symbolize night and unrest. I seemed to be lying neither asleep nor awake, looking down a long corridor of gray half-light, where all stable things had become shadowy, paradoxical. All I had done shadows, all I had felt suffered, taking visible form, antic and perverse, mocking without relevance, inherent themselves with the denial of the significance they should have affirmed, thinking I was. I was not who was not who. I could smell the curves of the river beyond the dusk, and I saw the last lights supine and tranquil upon tide flats, like pieces of broken mirror. Then beyond them lights began in the pale, clear air, trembling a little like butterflies, hovering a long way off. Benjamin, the child of. How he used to sit before that mirror, refuge unfailing in which conflict-tempered silence reconciled. Benjamin, the child of mine old age, held hostage into Egypt. Oh, Benjamin. Dilsey said it was because mother was too proud for him. They came into white people's lives like that, in sudden sharp black trickles that isolate white facts for an instant in unarguable truth, like under a microscope. The rest of the time just voices that laugh when you see nothing to laugh at. Tears when no reason for tears. They will bet on the odd or even number of mourners at a funeral. A brothel full of them in Memphis went into a religious trance, ran naked into the street. It took 3 policemen to subdue one of them. Yes, Jesus, oh, good man, Jesus, oh, that good man. Car stopped. I got out, with them looking at my eye. When the trolley came, it was full. I stopped on the back platform. "Seats up front," the conductor said. I looked into the car. There were no seats on the left side. "I'm not going far," I said. "I'll just stand here." We crossed the river, the bridge, that is, arching slow and high into space between silence and nothingness, where lights, yellow and red and green, trembled in the clear air, repeating themselves. "Better go up front and get a seat," the conductor said. "I get off pretty soon," I said. "Couple of blocks." I got off before we reached the post office. They'd all be sitting around somewhere by now, though. And then I was hearing my watch, and I began to listen for the chimes, and I touched Shreve's letter through my coat. The bitten shadows of the elms flowing upon my hand. And then, as I turned into the quad, the chimes did begin, and I went on while the notes came up like ripples on a pool, and passed me, and went on, saying, "Quarter to what?" "All right, quarter to what?" Our windows were dark. The entrance was empty. I walked close to the left wall when I entered, but it was empty. Just the stairs curving up into the shadows, echoes of feet, and the sad generations, like light dust upon shadows, my feet waking them like dust, slightly to settle again. I could see the letter before I turned the light on, propped against a book on the table, so I would see it. Calling him my husband. And then Spode said they were going somewhere, would not be back until late, and Mrs. Bland would need another cavalier. But I would have seen him, and he cannot get another car for an hour, because after 6 o'clock. I took out my watch and listened to it clicking away, not knowing it couldn't even lie. Then I laid it face up on the table and took Mrs. Bland's letter and tore it across and dropped the pieces into the wastebasket and took off my coat, vest, collar, tie, and shirt. The tie was spoiled too, but then niggers. Maybe a pattern of blood he could call that the one Christ was wearing. I found the gasoline in Shreve's room and spread the vest on the table, where it would be flat, and opened the gasoline. The first car in town, a girl. Girl, that's what Jason couldn't bear, the smell of gasoline, making him sick. Then got madder than ever because a girl. Girl had no sister. But Benjamin, the child of my sorrowful, if I just had a mother, so I could say mother. Took a lot of gasoline, and I couldn't tell if it was still the stain or just the gasoline. It had started to cut to smarting again, so when I went to wash, I hung the vest on a chair and lowered the light cord so that the bulb would be drying the splotch. I washed my face and hands, but even then I could smell it within the soap, stinging, constricting the nostrils a little. Then I opened the bag and took the shirt and collar and tie out and put the bloody ones in and closed the bag and dressed. While I was brushing my hair, the half hour went. But there was until the 3/4 anyway, except, suppose, seeing in the rushing darkness only his own face, no broken feather unless 2 of them, but not 2 like that. Going to Boston the same night. Then my face, his face, for an instant across the crashing. Went out of darkness, 2 lighted windows and rigid, fleeing crash gone. His face and mine. Just did I see? Not goodbye. The marquee empty of eating. The road empty in darkness, in silence. The bridge arching into silence, darkness, sleep. The water peaceful and swift. Not goodbye. I turned out the light and went into my bedroom, out of the gasoline, but I could still smell it. I stood at the window. The curtains moved slow out of the darkness, touching my face like someone breathing asleep, breathing slow into the darkness again, leaving the touch. After they'd gone upstairs, Mother lay back in her chair, the camphor handkerchief to her mouth. Father hadn't moved. He still sat beside her, holding her hand, the bellowing hammering away like no place for it in silence. When I was little, there was a picture in one of our books, a dark place, into which a single weak ray of light came slanting upon 2 faces, lifted out of the shadow. You know what I'd do if I were king. She never was a queen or a fairy. She was always a king or a giant or a general. I'd break that place open and drag them out, and I'd whip them good. It was torn out, jagged out. I was glad. I'd have to turn back to it until the dungeon was Mother herself, she and Father, upward into weak light, holding hands and us lost somewhere below, even them without even a ray of light. When the honeysuckle got into it, as soon as I turned off the light and tried to go to sleep, it would begin to come into the room in waves, building and building up, until I would have to pant to get any air at all out of it, until I would have to get up and feel my way, like when I was a little boy. Hands can see touching, in the mind, shaping unseen door. Door, now nothing, hands can see. My nose could see gasoline, the vest on the table, the door, the corridor was still empty of all the feet in sad generations seeking water. Yet the unseeing eyes clenched like teeth, not disbelieving or doubting. Even the absence of pain, shin, ankle, knee, the long invisible flow of the stair railing, were a misstep in the darkness filled with sleeping Mother, Father, Caddy, Jason, Maury, door. I am not afraid. Only Mother, Father, Caddy, Jason, Maury, getting so far ahead, sleeping. I will sleep fast when I door. It was empty, too. The pipes, the porcelain, the stained quiet walls, the throne of contemplation. I'd forgotten the glass, but I could. Hands can see cooling fingers, invisible swan throat, where less than Moses' rod, the glass touches tentatively, not drumming, leading cool throat, drumming, cooling the metal, the glass, full, overfull, cooling the glass, the fingers flushing sleep, leaving the taste of dampened sleep in the long silence of the throat. I returned up the corridor, waking the lost feet in whispering battalions in the silence, into the gasoline, the watch telling its furious lie on the dark table, then the curtains breathing out of the dark upon my face, leaving the breathing upon my face. A quarter hour yet, and then I'll not be. The peacefulest words, peacefulest words. Non fui sum, fui non sum. Somewhere I heard bells once, Mississippi or Massachusetts. I am not. Massachusetts or Mississippi. Shreve has a bottle in his trunk. Aren't you even going to open it? Mr. and Mrs. Jason Richmond Compson announced the 3 times, days. Aren't you even going to open it? Marriage of their daughter Candace. That liquor teaches you to confuse the means with the end. I am. Drink. I was not. Let us sell Benji's pasture so that Quentin may go to Harvard and I may knock my bones together and together. I will be dead in.
Was it 1 year?
Caddy said. Shreve has a bottle in his trunk. Sir, I will not need Shreve's. I've sold Benji's pasture, and I can be dead in Harvard. Caddy said in the caverns and the grottos of the sea, tumbling peacefully to the wavering tides, because Harvard is such a fine sound. 40 acres is no high price for a fine sound. A fine dead sound. We will swap Benji's pasture for a fine dead sound. It will last him a long time, because he cannot hear it unless he can smell it. As soon as she came in the door, he began to cry. I thought all the time it was just one of those town squirts that Father was always teasing her about, until I didn't notice him any more than any other stranger drummer or what thought they were army shirts, until all of a sudden I knew he wasn't thinking of me at all as a potential source of harm, but was thinking of her when he looked at me, was looking at me through her, like through a piece of colored glass.
Why must you meddle with me? Don't you know it won't do any good? I thought you'd have left that for Mother and Jason.
Did Mother set Jason to spy on you? I wouldn't have. Women only use other people's codes of honor. It's because she loves Caddy. Staying downstairs even when she was sick, so Father couldn't kid Uncle Maury before Jason. Father said Uncle Maury was too poor a classicist to risk the blind immortal boy in person. He should have chosen Jason, because Jason would have made only the same kind of blunder Uncle Maury himself would have made. Not one to get him a black eye. The Patterson boy was smaller than Jason, too. They sold kites for a nickel apiece. Until the trouble over finances, Jason got a new partner, still smaller. One small enough anyway, because T.P. said, Jason's still treasurer. But Father said, why should Uncle Maury work if he, Father, could support 5 or 6 niggers that did nothing at all but sit with their feet in the oven? He certainly could board and lodge Uncle Maury now and then and lend him a little money, who kept his father's belief in the celestial derivation of his own species at such a fine heat. Then Mother would cry and say that Father believed his people were better than hers, that he was ridiculing Uncle Maury to teach us the same thing. She couldn't see that Father was teaching us that all men are just accumulations, dolls stuffed with sawdust, swept up from the trash heaps where all previous dolls had been thrown away, the sawdust flowing from what wound and what side, that not for me died not. It used to be I thought of death as a man, something like grandfather, a friend of his, a kind of private and particular friend, like we used to think of grandfather's desk, not to touch it, not even to talk loud in the room where it was. I always thought of them as being together somewhere all the time, waiting for old Colonel Sartoris to come down and sit with them, waiting on a high place beyond cedar trees. Colonel Sartoris was on a still higher place, looking out across at something, and they were waiting for him to finish looking at it and come down. Grandfather wore his uniform, and we could hear the murmur of their voices from beyond the cedars. They were always talking, and Grandfather was always right. The 3/4 began. The first note sounded, measured and tranquil, serenely peremptory, emptying the unhurried silence for the next one, and that's it, if people could only change one another forever. That way merged like a flame swirling up for an instant, then blown cleanly out along a cool, eternal dark instead of lying there trying not to think of the swing until all cedars came to have that vivid dead smell of perfume that Benji hated so. Just by imagining the clump, it seemed to me that I could hear whispers, secret surges, smell the beating of the hot blood under wild and scented flesh, watching against red eyelids, the swine untethered in pairs, rushing, coupled, into the sea, and we must just stay awake and see evil done for a little while. It's not always, and it doesn't have to be even that long for a man of courage. And do you consider that courage? And I, yes, sir. Don't you? And he? Every man is the arbitrator of his own virtues. Whether or not you consider it contagious is of more importance than the act itself, than any act, otherwise you could not be in earnest. And you don't believe I am serious? And I think, you are too serious to give me any cause for alarm. You wouldn't have felt driven to the expedient of telling me you have committed incense, otherwise, and I wasn't lying. And you wanted to sublimate a piece of natural human folly into a horror, and then exorcise it with truth, and it was to isolate her out of the loud world, so that it would have to flee us if necessary, and then the sound of it would be as though it had never been. And did you try to make her do it? And I was afraid to. I was afraid she might, and then it wouldn't have done any good. But if I could tell you we did it, I would have been so, and then the others wouldn't be so, and then the world would roar away. And now this other, you are not lying now either, but you are still blind to what is in yourself, to that part of general truth, the sequence of natural events and their causes, which shadows every man's brow, even Benji's. You are not thinking of finitude. You are contemplating an hypothesis in which a temporary state of mind will become symmetrical above the flesh and aware both of itself and of the flesh. It will not quite discard. You will not even be dead, and I temporarily. And you cannot bear to think that some day it will no longer hurt you like this. Now we're getting at it. You seem to regard it merely as an experience that will whiten your hair overnight, so to speak, without altering your appearance at all. You won't do it under these conditions. It will be a gamble. And the strange thing is that man, who is conceived by accident and whose every breath is a fresh cast with dice already loaded against him, will not face that final main which he knows beforehand. He has assuredly to face without essaying expedients ranging all the way from violence to petty chicanery that would not deceive a child, until some day, in very disgust, he risks everything on a single blind turn of a card. No man ever does that under the first fury of despair or remorse or bereavement. He does it only when he has realized that even the despair or remorse or bereavement is not particularly important to the dark dice man. And I, temporarily, and he. It is hard believing to think that a love or a sorrow is a bond purchased without design, and which matters willy-nilly, and is recalled without warning to be replaced by whatever issue the gods happen to be floating at the time. No, you will not do that until you come to believe that even she was not quite worth despair, perhaps. And I will never do that. Nobody knows what I know, and I think, you'd better go on up to Cambridge right away. He might go up into Maine for a month. You can afford it if you are careful. It might be a good thing. Watching pennies has healed more scars than Jesus. And I suppose I realize what you believe I will realize up there next week or next month. And then you will remember that for you to go to Harvard has been your mother's dream since you were born, and no Compson has ever disappointed a lady. And temporarily, it will be better for me, for all of us. And every man is the arbitrator of his own virtues. But let no man prescribe for another man's well-being. And temporarily, and he was the saddest word of all. There's nothing else in the world. It's not despair until time. It's not even time until it was. The last note sounded. At last it stopped vibrating, and the darkness was still again. I entered the sitting room and turned on the light. I put my vest on. The gasoline was faint now, barely noticeable, and in the mirror the stain didn't show. Not like my eye did, anyway. I put on my coat. Shreve's letter crackled through the cloth, and I took it out and examined the address and put it in my side pocket. Then I carried the watch into Shreve's room and put it in his drawer, and went to my room, got a fresh handkerchief, and went down to the door and put my hand on the light switch. Then I remembered I hadn't brushed my teeth, so I had to open the bag again. Found my toothbrush and got some of Shreve's paste and went out and brushed my teeth. I squeezed the brush as dry as I could and put it back in the bag and shut it, and was at the door again. Before I snapped the light out, I looked around to see if there was anything else. Then I saw that I had forgotten my hat. I'd have to go by the post office, and I'd be sure to meet some of them, and they'd think I was a Harvard Square student, making like he was a senior. I'd forgotten to brush it, too, but Shreve had a brush, so I didn't have to open the bag any more.